Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I talk in English better than. We're very honored today to host this international conference organized by the research group in applied linguistics and language teaching under the title Translation and the Compilation of Bilingual Dictionaries. Normally we should have welcomed the president of the university, but he couldn't make it, so he okay. Under the program we have some speakers. Din El-Bouchekhi from Qatar, who is in fact a specialist in the field of translation and the compiling of the dictionaries. Our Dean Mohammed Larouz, Tawfiq Allah Afkinish, Mohammed Juni, and Dris Ardwani. Of course, Mohammed Medjuni from Fed School, Translation. Din Khaloufi from our Faculty of Arts and Humanities, and Dris Ardwani from the same faculty. I think we'll start, and of course here we have the keynote speaker who is this Bouchekhi has been from Qatar, but of course we will start with our dean, who's going to say a word, and the floor is yours.
شكرا أستاذ استثمار كوات. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السيدات والسادة الأساتذة، أعزائي الطلبة، أيها الحضور الكريم، يشرفنا أن أحضر معكم لنفتتح هذا النشاط العلمي المتميز الذي تنظمه مجموعة البحث في اللسانيات التطبيقية وتعليم اللغات، مشاركة مجموعة من المختصين في مجال الترجمة وصناعة القواميس. واسمحوا لي في البداية أن أرحب بكم جميعا في رحاب هذه الكلية، وأن أتمنى لنا جميعا نجاحا حقيقيا لعملنا، كما أعبر عن شكري الخالص لكل أعضاء الفريق في مجموعة البحث التي أتشرف بإدارتها التابعة لشعبة الإنجليزية بكليتنا. إن هذا المشروع يندرج ضمن برنامج وطني لدعم البحث العلمي في العلوم الإنسانية والاجتماعية، الذي هو برنامج ابن خلدون، والذي أطلقه المركز الوطني للبحث العلمي سنة 2018. وكان لكليتنا الشرف أن حظيت بمشروعين، واحد هو هذا الذي نجتمع عليه اليوم، وهو من تأطيري ويتعلق بإنجاز an English Arabic Dictionary of Applied Linguistics and the Teaching of Languages، قاموس إنجليزي عربي للغات التطبيقية وتعليم اللغات. والآخر يتعلق، المشروع الثاني يتعلق بإشكالية زراعة الكيف بشمال المغرب وديناميات التحولات الاجتماعية والاقتصادية والمجالية. وهذا إن دل على شيء فإنما يدل على أن كليتنا تتوفر على كفاءات علمية محترمة على المستوى الوطني. وفي اعتقادنا فإن هذا اليوم الدراسي يأتي في وقت لاحق، لأنه يمنحنا فرصة لتبادل وجهات النظر والخبرة في مجال الترجمة وصناعة المعاجم. فالدراسة المعجمية تعد من أقدم وأصعب الدراسات التطبيقية التي تهتم بالمعاني والمفردات في لغة معينة لغرض تجميعها في شكل كتاب، فهي تهتم بمعاني الكلمات وكيفية تنظيمها، كما تهتم عموما باستخدام اللغة وفهم الكلمات من قبل المستخدمين وكيفية تطويرها. من هنا تجلت أهمية الترجمة كأداة تواصل فعالة تمكننا من تحقيق الأهداف التي يسعى إليها بلدنا. وهكذا فإن صناعة القواميس هي قطاع مخصص لتسهيل التواصل متعدد اللغات الشفوي والمكتوب، وتحتوي صناعة المعاجم على أنشطة الترجمة والترجمة الإلكترونية وتطوير أدوات تكنولوجية اللغة وتنظيم المؤتمرات الدولية وتعليم اللغات والاستشارات اللغوية. الترجمة هي فن نقل الكلام من لغة إلى أخرى، وهي فن قديم قدم الحضارة الإسلامية، وعلى من يعمل في هذا الفن أن يواصل سعيه الدائم للحفاظ على مستوى في اللغتين التي ينقل منها والتي ينقل إليها، فاللغة الحية دائمة التغيير. وعلى المترجم أن يحدث مصادره من معاجم عامة ومتخصصة باستمرار، مما يتناسب مع التطور الحديث في عالم المعلومات. ومن هنا يتبين أهمية اختيار الترجمة وصناعة المعاجم كموضوع لهذه الندوة، حيث تمكننا المعاجم المختصة في اللسان التطبيقي وتدريس اللغات من تلبية احتياجات المؤسسات الجامعية المغربية من هيئات التدريس والبحث العلمي، وتوفير المعرفة اللازمة في مجال تعليم اللغات واللغة الإنجليزية خاصة، من أجل تحقيق فهم جيد واستخدام ملء لهذه اللغة العالمية. كما يمكن هذا النوع من المعاجم لطلبتنا من اكتساب أساليب وتقنيات في مجال اللسان التطبيقي وتدريس اللغة. ولعل سيطرة العالم الأنجلوساكسوني اليوم على عالم القوة الاقتصادية والتواصل يجعل من لغته قوة فارضة النفس في العالم. أحيي أعضاء مجموعة البحث على هذه المبادرة التي تندرج ضمن الدينامية العلمية التي أطلقتها الكلية في إطار تصور جديد للدفع بالإشعاع الثقافي في أفق خلق جو إيجابي يشجع ويسند الإقبال على الدرس الجامعي والبحث العلمي من زوايا متعددة. لا يخفي أن الأنشطة الثقافية في رحاب الجامعة تعد دعامة حقيقية لبناء جسور التواصل والتفاعل على أوسع نطاق بين أساتذة الكلية وطلبتها. لن أطيل عليكم، أدعو طلبتنا الأعزاء إلى استغلال هذه الفرصة لاكتشاف خبايا الترجمة وإكراهاتها وإيجابيتها، كما أجد ترحاب كل من أساتذة توفيق الله أفكنيش، السي أحمد العلوي، الأستاذ سدريس الرضواني، الأستاذ محمد مديوني، والأستاذ سعد الدين الخلوفي، والأستاذ سيف أقشمر، والدكتور مصطفى جبور. أجدد لكم الشكر، وأجدد كذلك الشكر للسيد رئيس الجامعة رغم غيابه هذا النشاط هذا اليوم، وقد اعتذر عن حضور هذا اللقاء. كما أعيد الترحاب بكل الحاضرين، والشكر موصول لأعضاء مجموعة البحث واللجنة المنظمة في إخراج هذا اليوم إلى حيز الوجود، ولكل المتدخلين، متمنيا لأشغالنا كامل النجاح والتوفيق. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
Thank you, Professor Larousse, for this enlightening introduction about this conference. Now we'll give the floor to our guest speaker from Doha Institute, Qatar, Dean Bouchikhi. The floor is yours.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته، وأسعد الله صباحكم. يطيب لي أن أشارك معكم في هذه الندوة المباركة، وأنا سعيد جدا بأن أتواصل مع زملائي الأساتذة وإخواني الطلبة، راجيا كل التوفيق للكلية والجامعة وجميع البرامج والمشاريع المندرجة فيها. أجدد شكري للسيد عميد الكلية ولرئيس الجامعة ولرئيس الجلسة وللحاضرين جميعا. وأبدأ بالآتي. اخترت أن أتحدث اليوم في هذه المناسبة عن موضوع عنوانه صناعة المعاجم الثنائية ومعايير تقييس المصطلحات. في البداية أود أن أؤكد أن موضوع المعاجم الثنائية ليس عملا تقنيا ينجزه القائمون عليه من منظور تقني محض، وإنما يندرج هذا الموضوع في إطار أعم، هو نقل المعرفة العلمية العالمية وتوطينها في البلدان العربية. ولما كانت المعارف العلمية العالمية تنتج بلغات عالمية غير العربية على وجه العموم، فإن الترجمة أصبحت الوسيلة الأساسية للإفادة من هذه المعارف، ومن أدواتها الأساسية هذا الصنف من المعاجم الثنائية. لكن الأهم من المعاجم الثنائية في قطاع المعارف والعلوم بصفة خاصة هو صنف المعاجم المصطلحية، ذلك لأن المعرفة العلمية أيا كانت تقوم أساسا على أنساق المصطلحات والمفاهيم في صياغة ظواهرها ومبادئها التفسيرية وقواعدها وكل المعطيات المتعلقة بإقامة النظريات والافتراضات وغيرها. وفهم هذه الأنساق المفاهيمية والمصطلحية هو أساسي لفهم العلم برمته أيا كان هذا العلم، فإن جردت كل علم من نسقه المفهوم والمصطلحي كنت جردته من روحه. ولذلك فإن هذا الصنف من المعاجم هو الأداة الرئيسية لفهم العلم ومحتوياته. فكيف يتسنى إذن أن نصنع هذا النوع من المعاجم صناعة تحقق الهدف المتوقع منها؟ لا شك أن عددا من الباحثين والطلبة الذين يواجهون عملية نقل المعرفة أيا كان هذا الصنف من المعرفة يواجهون نقل مصطلحها وفهم الدلالات التي تؤديها هذه المصطلحات داخل حقولها المعرفية. وأول ما يواجهون هو التعدد المربك لفهم العلم في ذاته بقواعده ومعطياته ونظرياته وافتراضاته ونتائجه. ولا أفتأ أذكر أن ترجمة كتاب Cours de linguistique générale لفرديناند دو سوسور إلى العربية كم شهد من الإرباكات التي أدت إلى سوء فهم كبير للنظرية اللسانية كما قدمها فرديناند دو سوسور، خاصة أثناء ترجمة ثلاثيته المعروفة لونغاج بارول. ومعلوم أن كتابه يتأسس، كتاب المنسوب إليه يتأسس على هذه الثلاثية، وكل إرباك فيها أو في ترجمة محتواها هو إرباك لفهم ما قدمه في هذه المحاضرات المجموعة في كتاب. وهذا دليل واضح على أن الفهم الدقيق للمصطلحات ونقلها بصورة دقيقة إلى اللغات الأخرى هو باب المعرفة العلمية الصحيحة. وأستطيع أن أقيس على ذلك جملة كبيرة من الأمثلة التي تحفل بها الكتب المترجمة في شتى التخصصات، ليس فقط في العلوم الإنسانية والاجتماعية ولكن أيضا في مختلف حقول المعرفة العلمية من طب وفيزياء وكيمياء وغيرها من العلوم الطبيعية الأخرى. أستطيع أن أقول مثلا كيف ترجم فونين في العربية، فنجد فونين صوتا وصوتيم وصوتية، ونجد في مورفين ما يقابلها مورفين وصيغة وصرفيم وصرفية وصرفة، وهكذا نجد عددا كبيرا من المصطلحات التي تقابل مصطلحا إنجليزيا أو فرنسيا واحدا من قبيل ألوفون وغيرها من المصطلحات اللسانية أو غير اللسانية. لكن الغريب هو أن يصل الأمر بمن يقوم بترجمة المصطلح إلى التقليد الذي يصل إلى ترجمة مثلا مصطلح ديفيرونس الذي جاء به ديريدا لكتابة ديفيرونس بأ بدل أو لبيان التميز في هذا المفهوم، فجاءت ترجمات لهذا المصطلح أو اقتراحات لترجمة هذا المصطلح مثلا بالاختلاف وكتابة التاء بين قوسين في مصطلح الاختلاف، أو كتابة الألف بين قوسين في كلمة الاختلاف، وهكذا دواليك جاءت هناك مصطلحات عديدة حتى كما قلت وصل الأمر إلى حد التقليد الذي يشبه التقليد الحرفي فيما يتعلق بتعريب هذه المصطلحات أو ترجمتها. طبعا كل انحراف في فهم المصطلح المترجم أو في دقة المصطلح المترجم هو انحراف في فهم العلم وإطباق لمن يتعاطى لهذا العلم بالعربية، وبذلك تسقط المهمة الأساسية التي يمكن أن يقوم بها صانع المعاجم الثنائية أو المتعددة اللغات في مجال العلوم والمعارف عامة. لننظر إذن لماذا يحدث هذا الإرباك وكيف يمكن معالجته. بالتقييس المصطلحي normalization هو رد جميع المصطلحات المترجمة أيا كانت اللغة المترجمة إليها إلى قياس واحد مضطرد، بحيث تخضع جميعها إلى المعايير ذاتها أثناء نقلها من لغة إلى لغة. والهدف من ذلك هو مواجهة مشكل التعدد المصطلحي الذي لا يقع فقط في اللغة العربية، ولكن يمكن أن يقع في كل لغة من اللغات العالمية لم تنتج معرفة في قطاع معين، أو أرادت أن تتكامل في هذا القطاع بنقل المعارف العالمية الأخرى بلغتها، كما هو الشأن حين تنقل العلوم إلى اللغة الكورية أو إلى اللغة الإسبانية أو إلى اللغة الفرنسية وغير ذلك. إذن من أجل النقل الموحد للمعرفة العالمية إلى لغة من اللغات خاصة في قطاعها المصطلحي نحتاج إلى ما يسمى التقييس المصطلحي. وهناك تجارب غربية في هذا المجال، أهمها هو ما أنشأته منظمة التقييس الدولية سنة 52 و900 وألف، حين أنشأت لجنة فنية يطلق عليها اللجنة رقم 37 خاصة بالتقييس المصطلحي. فكل مصطلح يدخل إلى اللغات الاتحاد الأوروبي يخضع إلى تقييس مصطلحي ويصبح مصطلحا معتمدا. وأما في تجاربنا العربية فإن أهم تجربة يمكن أن نتحدث عنها على المستوى الرسمي هو تجربة مكتب تنسيق التعليم بإنشاء مرصد للمصطلحات الموحدة أساسه هو معاجم المصطلحات الموحدة. المقصود هنا بالموحدة أي التي خضعت إلى جملة من المعايير اتفق عليها واضعوها من مختلف الدول العربية في مؤتمر يعقد لهذه الغاية، وتصبح آنذاك موحدة تأخذ صفة الوحدة أو في معجم من المعاجم. وهذه المعاجم متاحة طبعا في موقع مكتب تنسيق التعريف، وهي تغطي قطاعات معرفية متعددة، وهي ثنائية وثلاثية اللغات ومتعددة اللغات بين الفرنسية والإنجليزية والعربية وأحيانا الألمانية وغيرها. وهناك أيضا تجربة ينبغي التنويه بها، وهي تجربة المصطلحات الطبية الموحدة التي تعود جهودها إلى المكتب الإقليمي لمنظمة الصحة العالمية في الشرق الأوسط، وهي أيضا متاحة على موقع الإنترنت ويمكن الإفادة منها. هاتان تجربتان لا بد من الإشارة إليهما في عالمنا العربي، لكن هذه التجارب على أهميتها لم تنتج حلا لهذا الموضوع، موضوع تعدد المصطلحات. طبعا هناك عدة أسباب تؤدي إلى هذا الوضع، من بينها ونستطيع أن نذكر كثيرا من ذلك، من بينها عدم التزام الباحثين والجامعات والمؤسسات بما ينتجه مكتب تنسيق التعليم بخصوص هذه المعاجم الموحدة، أو فيما يتعلق بكليات الطب فيما ينتجه المعاجم الطبية الموحدة في التابع لمنظمة الصحة العالمية. إذا أردنا أن نعرف الأسباب التي تؤدي إلى هذا النوع من التعدد في جميع اللغات وليس في العربية فقط، نستطيع أن نتبين ذلك بمعرفة أولا مكونات المصطلح. مما يتكون المصطلح في العلم؟ المصطلح له عدة أوجه. الوجه الأول هو أنه تسمية لموضوع معين محدد في قطاع معرفي معين، وهذه التسمية هي الوجه العباري الذي يأخذه المفهوم. والمكون الثاني هو المفهوم الذي يؤديه المصطلح، أي السمات التصورية التي ينبني عليها المصطلح بوجهه العباري. وأما الثالث فهو ما يحيل عليه في الواقع الخارجي أو في الواقع الذهني هذا المصطلح أو المفهوم. والعنصر الرابع أو المكون الرابع هو تعريف المصطلح، لأن التعريف هو الذي يحد المفهوم في مجال معرفي أو علمي محدد. هذه إذن هي مكونات المصطلح. فحين نأتي إلى ترجمة مصطلح معين في قطاع ما، فهل سنترجم التسمية الوجه العباري، أو نترجم المفهوم، أو نترجم ما يحيل عليه، أو نترجم التأليف؟ من خصائص المصطلح أنه ينتمي إلى مجال علمي محدد، وهذا الانتماء أساسي في معرفة ما المصطلح، لأن المصطلح الواحد يمكن أن ينتمي إلى أكثر من مجال علمي ويأخذ تحديده داخل كل مجال بشكل مختلف عن المجال الآخر. ولذلك لا بد من مراعاة انتماء المصطلحات إلى مجالاتها العلمية. فالنسق مثلا، مفهوم النسق في الفلسفة ليس هو مفهوم النسق في الرياضيات، وليس هو مفهوم النسق في المنطق. والجدر في اللغة ليس مفهومه في اللغة كمفهومه في الرياضيات أو في الهندسة أو في الجبر أو في غيرها من العلوم الأخرى. فالانتقال إذا تحديد المجال هو جزء من تحديد مفهوم المصطلح داخل هذا المجال. ومن خصائص المصطلح الأساسية أنه تسمية واعية للموضوع، وهذه التسمية الواعية لا تكون في الكلمات. الكلمات هي تسميات غير واعية، لكن المصطلح هو تسمية واعية ترتكز على خصيصة من خصائص الموضوع المسمى. ولذلك إذا نظرت في كل مصطلح تجد أنه يرتكز في تسميته على خاصية من خصائص موضوعه، وهذا ما لا يوجد في الكلمة. أنا لا أعرف لماذا سميت الباب بابا ولم تسمى شيئا آخر، ولماذا سميت السماء سماء ولم تسمى شيئا آخر؟ ولكن أعرف أن مصطلح كمبيوتر أو حاسوب سمي كذلك لأنه يعكس خصيصة أساسية في هذا الجهاز، وهي قدرته الفائقة على إجراء العمليات الحسابية. وكل مصطلح مرتبط بهذه التسمية الواحدة. الأمر الثالث في المصطلح أنه لا يمكن فهمه بمعزل عن المصطلحات التي يتآلف معها داخل المجال العلمي الواحد. وهنا من الأخطاء التي يمكن أن يرتكبها المترجم في وضع معجم ثنائي اللغة هو أن يتعامل مع المصطلح بصفته وحدة معزولة عن بقية المصطلحات الأخرى. المصطلح وجه من وجوه العلم يرتبط بنسق من المفاهيم، ولا يمكن النظر إلا بصفته وحدة داخل هذا النسق، وترجمته يجب أن تأخذ بعين الاعتبار كل المصطلحات المجاورة له داخل حقله المفهوم. وغياب هذا النوع من الوعي في ترجمة المصطلحات العلمية أو المعرفية بصفة عامة يؤدي إلى إرباك كبير في ترجمة المصطلحات جميعها. ترجمة المصطلح إذا بناء على ما سبق إما أن تكون ترجمة للتسمية أي للوجه العباري، وهذا ما يسمى تعريب المصطلح. فإيديولوجيا مثلا أترجمها بالعربية إلى إيديولوجيا، إيديولوجي أترجمها إلى إيديولوجيا، وهكذا. أو ترجمة المفهوم بغض النظر عن الوجه العباري، أي أركز على المفهوم على مضمون المصطلح لا على وجهه العباري. أو ترجمة خاصية من خصائص الموضوع، وهنا أركز على خصيصة معينة، إما اللون أو الحجم أو الشكل أو الرائحة أحيانا أو الوظيفة أحيانا أخرى، فيكون كذلك تركيز على خصيصة وإبرازها في نقل المصطلح العلمي. إذن فترجمة المصطلح ليست ترجمة واحدة، وإنما هي إشكال من ترجمة المصطلح، كل منها تأخذ شكلا من الإشكال. ولذلك فموضوع التعدد يطرح نفسه بشكل طبيعي وتلقائي وعفوي، لأنه من ترجم بالتسمية سيقترح مصطلحا، ومن ترجم بالمفهوم سيقترح مصطلحا آخر، ومن ترجم بمراعاة خصيصة من الخصائص سيقترح مصطلحا ثالثا، وهكذا دواليك. فموضوع التعدد إذن موضوع عفوي وتلقائي وطبيعي، ولذلك ينبغي من أجل الحد منه مراعاة منهجية، وهي التقييس النسقية والتقييس المصطلحي. ماذا نقصد بالتقييس؟ نقصد بالتقييس وفقا لما قدمناه في التعريف الأول مراعاة جملة من المعايير. أول هذه المعايير معيار البساطة التركيبية، حيث إذا أمكن ترجمة المصطلح الواحد بمصطلح واحد فالأسبقية له، بدل أن أترجمه بمصطلحين اثنين. مثلا مصطلح اللسانيات مقابل جيد للينغويستيكس بدل علم اللغة، لأن ما سيترتب على علم اللغة هو نوع من الإرباك في الترجمة سأوضحه فيما بعد. معيار وضوح الدلالة، أي إذا كان المصطلح شفافا غير مغلقا من حيث الدلالة فهذا أولى من المصطلح المغلق. مثلا في ترجمة المصطلح في علوم الحاسوب ديسك وينشستر، نوع من الأقراص المدمجة الذي كان سوريا ديسك وينشستر، هذا المصطلح إذا ترجمته بترجمة حرفية ديسك وينشستر لا نعرف ما معنى وينشستر بالنسبة قرص وينشستر، لا نعرف في ثقافتنا العربية ما معنى وينشستر، بينما تحيل في الثقافة الأمريكية إلى نوع من أنواع البارود وما يركب في البارود من سلاح. وهكذا فالعلاقة بين البارود والسلاح هي الموضوعة بين 30 هي التي تؤدي إلى تسمية هذا النوع من القرص ب ديسك وينشستر، لأنه مماثل في الحجم ميجا أتمون 15 على 15 على 30 و30 على 30. فهذا الحجم مماثل لديسك وينشستر فسمي ديسك وينشستر. هذه المعلومة الثقافية ليست معروضة أمام المستمع أو المستعمل العربي أو غيره، ولذلك فإن هذا النوع من الترجمة الحرفية المبنية على معلومات ثقافية مرتبطة بمجتمع معين لا يساعد على فهم المصطلح المترجم. بالنسبة لمعيار أيضا الثالث هو معيار التداول بين أهل الاختصاص. وهنا نقصد بمعيار التداول بين أهل الاختصاص أي إذا توافق أهل الاختصاص في علم معين على تعامل بمصطلح معين مقابل مصطلح آخر، فالأفضلية لأهل الاختصاص إذا اعتمدوا هذا المصطلح. مثلا مصطلح براغماتيكس شاع أنه التداولية، لكن هناك من يستعمل الدرائعية. الدرائعية حجم التداول بها محدود مقابل الذين يستعملون التداولية، فيؤخذ بالشائع عند أهل الاختصاص مقابل غير الشائع. والمعيار الرابع هو معيار القوة التوليدية. نقصد بالقوة التوليدية أن المصطلح الواحد قد يظهر مفردا، لكنه قد يخضع إلى تركيبات مصطلحية متعددة، كما حصل مثلا في مصطلح كمبيوتر الذي تعدد دخل في تركيبات كثيرة جدا مصطلحية. وهكذا إذا قلنا حاسوب فحاسوب يمكن أن يدخل ضمن التركيبات المصطلحية الأخرى، لكن إذا ترجمناه بآلة حسابية أو حاسوبية أو آلة عقلية قصوى كما كان يقال إلى آخره، فهذا النوع من المصطلحات لا يتماشى مع القوة التوليدية التي يمكن أن يتركب منها المصطلح الواحد. وخامسا معيار أسبقية الترجمة بالمفهوم على الترجمة الحرفية والترجمة السوسيوثقافية. الترجمة بالمفهوم هي التي تركز على خصيصة من خصائص المصطلح أو على مضمون المصطلح، بينما الترجمات الأخرى هي ترجمات تقوم على الوجه العباري، على مراعاة الوجه العباري في انتظار إنتاج المصطلح الذي يدل على المفهوم. فما دل على المفهوم واعتمده أهل الاختصاص يكون أسبق وأولى. والمعيار السادس هو معيار المجال المقيد، أي الانتماء إلى أقل عدد من المجالات العلمية. والمقصود بذلك إذا استطعنا أن نترجم المصطلح الأجنبي بمصطلح عربي واحد ينتمي إلى مجال علمي واحد، فهذا أفضل من مصطلح ينتمي إلى أكثر من مجال علمي واحد. وهكذا يكون بهذه المعايير نستطيع أن نحد من الإرباك الذي يعرضه التعدد المصطلحي، خاصة ونحن نقوم بصناعة معجم ثنائي اللغة أو متعدد اللغة. وأنا أريد أن أعود إلى ضرورة مراعاة هذه المعايير التركيبية والدلالية والتداولية ونمط الترجمة فيها، لأنها أساسية في أداء الدور الأساسي الذي تقوم به المعاجم الثنائية، وهو نقل المعرفة العلمية بصورة صحيحة وتوطين هذه المعرفة لتصبح أداة أساسية في إنتاج المعرفة باللغة العربية. أود أن أختم وأستسمح إن أطلت بالتأكيد على أن مراعاة النسقية في ترجمة المصطلح أمر أساسي جدا، وأن لا يتعامل مع المصطلح بصفة وحدة معزولة عن بقية المصطلحات التي تكون معه في نفس المجال المفهومي، لأن عدم مراعاة النسقية في ترجمة المصطلح تؤدي إلى إرباكات كثيرة لا يتسع المجال لإيراد أمثلة عديدة منها. أجدد شكري لكم وأرجو أن نلتقي في مناسبات متعددة أخرى، وشكرا مرة أخرى.
Shukran, Dr. Bouchikhi. Thank you so much, Professor Bouchikhi, for this constructive speech about bilingual dictionaries, and of course he dealt with some problems, difficulties, and how one can solve those problems, the steps that we should in fact follow in translating and compiling bilingual dictionaries. Thank you so much, Sir Bouchikhi. أتبقى معنا ولا غادي
نعم مرحبا.
تبقى معنا ولا غادي
شكرا جزيلا. لدي التزام بسيمينار آخر، فأنا مدعو على سيمينار آخر، فأعتذر وأتمنى لكم يوما موفقا.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور البوشيخي، شكرا جزيلا.
سي الدين، أشكرك مجددا وشكرا على تلبية الدعوة. كنا نأمل أن تكون حاضرا معنا في هذه الصباحية، ولكننا نعرف الظروف التي ظروف القاهرة، وأنه كان الطائرة باش غادي يوصل معنا هنا في اليوم، ولكنه مازال محبوس في قطر بظروف الجائحة. ونتمنى إن شاء الله نشوفوك حاضر معنا في المستقبل إن شاء الله. وأجدد شكرا لكم، ونتمنى إن شاء الله نراكم في القريب العاجل. وشكرا التصفيقات لسعد.
شكرا جزيلا. أود أن أشير إلى أننا ننظم مؤتمرا في شهر مايو المقبل عن معجم التوحد التاريخي للغة العربية وأبعاده الحضارية والعلمية، فالدعوة موجهة للجميع من أجل المشاركة، وشكرا جزيلا.
شكرا. Switch to
our English.
Oh, it was it's interesting again. I mean to listen. So Professor Azdin Bouchikhi is a specialist in dictionary compiling, and I think has been compiling an Arabic dictionary dated back to شحال سي عزدين؟ فوقاش؟
نعم.
تاريخ المعجم ديال التاريخي الذي تشتغلون حاليا، شحال وانتم بادين فيه؟
نعم.
2013.
نعم.
لا.
لم أسمع السؤال.
تاريخ اللغة العربية، ذاك تاريخ المعجم الذي تشتغلون عليه الآن، واش يمكن تهضرنا عليه شي شوية واحد بإيجاز، غير بواحد نصف دقيقة؟
طبعا. معجم التوحد للغة العربية هو معجم يرصد تاريخ الكلمات في اللغة العربية وتطورها منذ ظهرت في النصوص إلى اليوم. فمثلا نأخذ مثلا الكلمة إذا ظهرت في النقوش. مثلا لدينا كلمات عربية ظهرت في النقوش، فنحن نوثق ظهورها والمعنى الذي ظهرت به، ونتتبع هذا الظهور في النصوص، في الشعر الجاهلي وفي الوثائق والخطابات والرسائل والتآليف، ونتتبع كيف تم اشتقاق هذه الكلمات وما المعاني التي أخذت إلى حدود اليوم. أي نضع كل كلمات اللغة العربية على خط الزمن ونرصد التغيرات التي وقعت في بنيتها الصرفية والاشتقاقية وفي تطورها الدلالي. أنجزنا إلى حد الساعة ما يقارب 160,000 مدخل معجمي، وهي منشورة على الموقع dohadictionary.org، ونسعى إلى إتمام المرحلة الثانية التي تغطي 10 قرون من 500 قبل الهجرة إلى 500 بعد الهجرة، بعد سنة أو حوالي سنة، فنغطي بذلك 200,000 مدخل معجمي. ثم نعد الآن ببليوغرافيا ومدونة المرحلة اللاحقة التي تمتد على 10 قرون أخرى، ونكون بذلك قد غطينا تاريخ الكلمات العربية على مدى 20 قرنا منذ ظهورها أول مرة إلى اليوم. هذا على وجه الإجمال. هناك الموقع فيه تفاصيل كثيرة، ضحى dictionary.org، يمكن الدخول إليه ومعرفة هذه التفاصيل والاستفادة من المعجم.
وتبارك الله عليك السي عز الدين، ونتمنى لكم التوفيق ان شاء الله في هذا المسار الاكاديمي، ونتمنى ان الطلبه ديالنا والاعزاء انهم يستافدوا من التجربه ديالكم ويمشيو حتى هما في خطى ثابته انهم ينجزوا لهذا ما يسمى بالقواميس او المعاجم ثنائي اللغه، ولما لا. وشكرا السي عز الدين، ونشوفكم ان شاء الله في القريب العاجل. اوكي
ان شاء الله. شكرا جزيلا، وتحياتي للاساتذه الكرام.
Sorry, there's a slight change in the program. There's some delay in coffee break, so we'll move to our guest speakers, and starting by our dear Professor Ahmed Alawi.
So waited for depending on Professor Ahmed Alawi to prepare his PC and be connected to data show. Just one word about Professor Ahmed Alawi. So Ahmed Alawi used to be a teacher in the Department of English in this institution, and he was my teacher at the Teacher Training Institute or Center in Meknes. So he's one of the highly distinguished professors of English in Morocco, and I think he also moved to Qatar, and then he worked in Qatar for several years, and he is a freelance translator, and he is a professional translator. And I hope and I wish you would learn a lot from his experience as both as a teacher and a translator, professional translator. And I think he has also worked with the United Nations, with different governmental and non-governmental organizations. So I think Professor Ahmed Alawi is a really prominent figure in the field of translation, and I'm sure you will enjoy listening to his speech. Say Ahmed Alawi, take your time. We have our time. And sorry for the inconvenience.
Right, good morning everyone. Thank you, Dean Leroux, for this introduction. I'm happy to be here. I'd like to thank also the organizing committee for making this event happen. I'm glad to be here, especially as Dean Leroux said, this is where I started my career in Meknes before I moved elsewhere. Okay, so let's start. Professor Bouchikhi talked about standardization of the terms used in translation in general and in bilingual dictionaries. But he was talking about the standardization of the term that you produce when you translate into Arabic. So he was not talking, of course he gave details about the definition of the technical terms, and he talks about the concepts. Now, the heterogeneous aspect of translation and in dictionaries, in bilingual dictionaries, does not concern concepts, but it concerns the naming of the term, naming of the concept. So there's no problem. He gave the example of the phoneme, for example. Now, there are students of linguistics and professors, they know what the phoneme is. It's a variant of, in the pronunciation etymology. So there's no problem of concept, but there is a problem of the naming. There is no standard term for the phoneme. Some people call it phoneme. Okay. Some people call, for example, the vowel sa'it, musawit, and so on. So there's a problem in the naming when you're translating into Arabic in a particular field. Now, what I'm going to talk about is exactly the other side of the coin, the opposite. I'm talking about concepts, not the naming. Okay? And we'll be talking about this heterogeneous aspect of translation when we translate concepts in legal translation into English, from Arabic into English. So we'll be talking about equivalences, as you know, to do it this way. You have to juggle both of these. Okay, so this is the plan of my presentation. I'll start with the background to talk about the problem. The problem is that, as you know, translation is about equivalence. So all what we do in translation is equivalencing, and then of course we review the translation to make sure that the appropriate style has been used. And equivalence in legal translation, when we talk about Islamic law, Sharia law, when it is translated into English, is fraught with all sorts of problems, basically because the legal culture is not preserved in many aspects. And that's what we're going to talk about. Where these concepts that originate in Sharia law are not preserved in the translation into English. So I'm going to talk about the factors that are behind this incongruence, this asymmetry in translation. There are 9 of them. I will just focus on 5 of them. The first one is the historical shifts that happen, okay, that cause this, that contribute to masking this asymmetry between Western type laws and Sharia laws. And then the functional approach itself in translation, it causes this masking, because normally what we teach our students, will tell them you have to apply Scopus theory, you have to apply the functional approach. The target reader should understand very clearly in his or her own language. And of course this is coupled with the brief. We'll be talking about the translation brief, where the commissioner asks you specifically to use a particular style in the target translation for the reader, for the audience, to be clear according to the types of text that they are used to. If I produce a particular text in English, then that text should remind the audience, should remind the reader of similar texts that are written originally in that language. So that's the problem, again, of equivalence, and it contributes to this masking that I'm going to talk about. Now, the third element is the use of artificial intelligence by translators themselves and their heavier reliance on the internet. This constitutes also a component or element that contributes towards this masking of conceptual asymmetry. And the third one, again, localization is the culprit. It's behind this masking. We'll be talking about it very briefly. And then the terminological resources, and that's the topic of the of this event. We'll be talking about the role of dictionaries and glossaries and all the lexical resources that you use as a translator, these elements themselves contribute to this masking of the asymmetry that we're going to talk about. Now, the solution that I propose is that instead of dictionaries and glossaries, we have to use term-based, and then I'll talk about some arguments that indicate why it is that we have to rely on term bases rather than dictionaries. Right, so the first one is the background, and we talked about it. We said that when we translate into English, so when we translate Islamic law into English, we have got two different worldviews, okay, that are markedly different. Islamic law assumes that religion as a frame of reference where all human behavior is analyzed, and you know that law is about human behavior, what you can do and what you cannot do legally. Okay? And this is written in Islamic law by God. The humans do not write laws. The humans simply interpret laws and look for them in the sources of law. That's the Holy Book, of course, the prophetic tradition, analogy, qiyas, and consensus, ijma'. And of course, this is supported by what we call fatwa, legal opinion. For the Western type laws, the focus on the secular aspect of human activities should not be interpreted in any way by religion. As you know, for example, in some laws, especially in the United States, in common law, explicitly the state that religion has got nothing to do with law. And we'll explain this later. So these views, because they are markedly different, then they would produce asymmetries. Okay? Now, we would like, in the translation process, for this asymmetry to be there, for the source culture to be reflected in the translation, and this doesn't happen all the time. And I'm going to give you some examples. So this situation, of course, warrants the question about equivalence. Is equivalence really equivalent? To what extent can we claim that the translation into English is equivalent? And of course, we're talking about concepts, not the naming, not the terms that Professor Boucheri said. Okay, so ideally, that's the assumption, ideally, equivalence aims to assign equal meaning to legal terms in two languages, keeping the same legal effect. Okay, so that's what we teach our students. You have to keep the effect for you to apply Scopus theory in translation. That's a functionalist approach. And also, the source legal culture should be conspicuously there. Okay? So this is the locus of the presentation. That's the problem that we're going to debate. So the problem is that the ideal objective seems difficult to capture. So looking at the text which are translated into English, so you feel that this asymmetry is not there. It simply disappears. Okay. This is discussed by such edicts, of course, and Zemenka when they talked about common law and civil law. I'm going to talk about this in terms of Sharia law when it is translated into English. Okay. Now, these ladies talked extensively about what happens within the European Union. Okay. But the problem when you translate Sharia law into English is more serious and more flagrant. So the first element that contributes to this masking of conceptual incongruence or asymmetry is what happened historically. So you know that during colonialism in Morocco, in Iraq, in Egypt, in Southeast Asia, all the laws, if we take, for example, the case of Morocco, between 13 and 1919, all the laws, except family laws, marriage, divorce, and inheritance, some of it to some extent, which is also in the revision of 1985, it was also revised, they will change into Western-type laws, all of them. Okay? Now, if the courts are operating according to the laws that we understand now, we understand that you are operating with in our country, are Western type laws. Okay? So the Sharia law is there just to guide the judge. Okay? It has got an ethical rather than a legal function. And the same thing happened in Iraq and Egypt, extensively in Egypt, of course. Now, a better example is what happened in India. Okay? So Kitab al-Hidayah, which explains the Hanafi school of jurisprudence, and it contains all the laws of Islamic law, of Sharia law, for the Hanafi school of jurisprudence. They were recorded in Kitab al-Hidayah by Al-Marinain. Okay? And this was translated into Persian and then by Charles Hamilton into English, and it was stripped of all the Islamic laws, and they were changed. Okay? Now, I have chosen this quotation by Google, okay, that summarizes what happened historically to Islamic law. Under the guise or the excuse of preserving Islamic law, there was a conceptual invasion of Islamic law. Okay? All the concepts that are now used, okay, in these countries are Western type laws, of course, for the colonizers to serve their colonial purposes, economic, financial, and so on. English assumption and legal concept framed the technical vocabulary of Islamic law and guided how those rules were applied. Thereby, by doing this, they reshaped Islamic law itself. Okay? This is exactly what happened. And this is what caused this conceptual asymmetry, which we do not see in the translation. Of course, I'm talking about concepts, not talking about the naming. I'm talking about how you call a particular concept when you translate from Arabic into English. Okay? And the book is available. You can have access to it on archive.org if you would like to have a look at the book, part of it the original, and the translation by Charles Hamilton. Right. Now, of course, there are too many conceptual asymmetries. I'm going just to give you a few of them that you know, of course, because you are Muslim. Now, the unity, the concept of law, the unity and divinity of law is different. I mean, in our culture, law is divine, law is produced by God, not by humans, and it is, it enjoys or it reflects the unity in the sense that this law is for all humanity, not for one particular country or one particular people. Okay? And of course, it's different. The law that we understand is written by the government, is produced by the government, it is defended by the government through the police, the courts, and so on. It is protected by the government, and it is produced for a particular people in a geographical location which is limited. Now, and this is not the case. That's the first conceptual, incongruence or asymmetry. The second one is that the sources of law are purely religious, and we know that in Western type laws, religion has got nothing to do with law. Okay? 5 legal values in Islamic law, we have got only 2. Okay? When you judge human behavior in any Western type of laws, even the ones that are applied here in Morocco and in other Islamic countries, is either legal or illegal. Okay? But we have got 5 values in our culture. Some of them are makruh, wajib, mandub, mustahab. These simply disappear. I'm going to give you an example where they disappear. And also the duality of sanctions, of course, is sanctioned behavior. Okay? If you do something wrong, then the sanction in our culture is not only here in this world, but also in the other world. Okay? Now, for the Western type laws, this is not the case. Okay? Now, let me give you an example about this with the coffee debate that many of you know. Okay? So, what we understand by the functional approach, and that's what teachers of translation like myself teach their students, you have to understand, we have to ensure that the target reader understand. So translation is reader oriented, is audience oriented. So you focus on the target, okay? And then you give less importance to the source, because the person who is going to use the document is someone who is English, someone who does not know the Islamic law, someone who is not, does not have access to anything written in Arabic. So you have to make sure that the text or document that you produce in the translation must be accessible and easily understood by the target reader. Okay? Okay, that's one of the basic tenets of the functionalist approach, which is Scotland's theory. Also, you have to observe the principle of intertextuality. Tamas, the text that you produce as a translator should look like, in terms of style, in terms of form, in terms of content, it should look exactly like the text which is produced in the target reader's language. If the document is going to be read by an English-speaking person, then the document should look like exactly the document that he is used to reading. Okay? And also you have to respect the brief, so it's something which is sacred in the functions world. Before you start the translation, then you have to understand the intentions of the commissioner, what kind of text or what kind of message does the commissioner would like to impart, what is the purpose, what style you should adopt. Are you writing to women? Are you writing to children? Are you writing to old people? Are you writing to teachers? You have to take all this into consideration, and that's what we call technically the translation brief. There's also the revision brief. Okay, now, however, this requirement of the functionalist approach is for shorter requirements of all the translation which is done in connection with highly system-bound cultures, like what we are talking about when we translate from Sharia law into Western type laws. For example, the coffee debate, you know that there was some of you know this. Whether coffee in the 16th century is intoxicating like alcohol or not, then it would be judged as illegal. There was a huge debate. Okay? However, the accounts that you find in the Western sources, they talk only about two values, scale, two values, legal, illegal. Okay? But if you go to the Arabic sources, like the one by Arnaut, then they use the 5-scale source again. It could be Mendub, it could be Makro, but they don't talk about this in the West. It's legal, illegal. But we know this is politicized. I mean, the reason why this issue was raised is because of the gathering, especially in Mecca in 1570 or something like this. In Mecca, the discussion or the debate started because the rulers felt that these people gathering are going to start, debating political issues. That was the opposition. But the coffee itself is a commodity and economically profitable. Why should they stop it? Okay? And then it was off and on. They stopped them. Sometimes they destroyed the coffee places and so on. Now, the second thing in the functional approach are the rhetorical preferences. So again, when we teach our children, sorry, not children, they are our children. When we teach our students, we tell them or we ask them to pay attention to the rhetorical preferences of the target language again, never the source language. Now, an example is this. For example, when we, if you look at any penal law which is written in Arabic, then all the laws, all the rules, all the clauses, all the paragraphs in the penal law start with the sanction. يعاقب بالسجن مدة لا تقل عن 7 سنوات كل من فعل كذا وكذا وكذا. However, in English, you have to start with the object. Any person who being blah 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 shall be imprisoned to 7 years. It's a pattern, and again, don't ask me why in Arabic we start with the sanction. That's the way it is. Okay? So if you are translating into Arabic, you have to start with the sanction. Okay? Don't ask me why. This is a rhetorical preference. Of course, in Arabic there are other, rhetorical preferences when to use the passive voice, when to use the active voice, and so on. Okay? Now, the problem is that legal translation is not always secondary to observe these functional principles only. It has got more to it. Okay? For example, if you are translating a birth certificate, it's not a big deal. The name of the mother, the name of the person, the date of birth, maybe the time of birth, and that's it. It's not a big deal. Okay? But if you are engaged in something which is more serious, that can change the life of people, okay, then the secondary or documentary translation is not enough. Now, in an earlier piece of work that I did, I asked translators about this question number 6, 11 questions. This is question number 6. If you are not sure about the translation of a legal term, what do you do? Okay? Google it, Google it, but make sure that it is using official websites. Check it on specialized glossaries online. All of the above. Other, please specify. That's 0%. Okay. So notice that the Google the term. That's the initial thing that translators do, even professional translators, including myself. Okay. Right, now the reason why we go to artificial intelligence is of this trade-off between speed and accuracy. Now for me to come up with the accurate term, I have got to do a lot of research, okay? And that's why at the end of this presentation we'll be talking about the term base, okay? So I have to save time because I am a professional translator. I'm not going to stay there doing research for a couple of days just to translate properly a 1 or 2 pages to find the accurate term. I'm not going to do it. Okay. Now, also sometimes knowingly translators opt for inaccurate terms because of their currency on the internet. Okay. So you know that a particular term is inaccurate, but you have to use it because what you have in mind is that people use the internet and people see that term in the internet. If you don't use it, they would, also claim that maybe it's your translation which is inaccurate. Okay. Going back again to the brief, okay, the commissioner who is going to pay you for the translation will tell you to use the terms that enjoy a lot of currency. Okay, whether in printed material or on the internet, right? So sometimes the translator would go for the inaccurate term on purpose. Okay, like this example here, taken from Al-Jamhara. Al-Jamhara is good. It's a term base. I use it myself. Okay, in the Arabic side, but not in English. Now, a concept, so we'll be talking about concept, not terms, and isti'man. And there are too many terms like istiqlaf, in Sharia law. And isti'man is usually translated as seeking asylum, and that's exactly how it is translated in Al-Jamhara. Okay? However, as you know, or people who are involved in Sharia law, this concept is very, very complicated. It's not asylum. Okay? For one thing, when you seek asylum against your own country. Okay? For example, I do not find what to eat in my country does not respect human rights, and so on. Okay? But al-isti'man, okay, talab al-aman, is not the case. Okay? Sometimes you're asking for protection from the people where you are going yourself. Okay? So that's only one difference. But there are other differences because the concept includes notions like truce, peace, treaty, trust, assurance, safety, and it is enforced by a particular person and not others. It is granted on the basis of certain conditions like religion and so on, and also the place of isti'man is also taken into consideration, whether the land of Muslims or land of non-Muslims, Bilad al-Harb or still, and the duration, whether it is asked for a particular limited period or for a long period. So it's not that straightforward to call it asylum, and that's how it is translated. Okay, right? So the source again will be using the same thing in the term base. وإن أحد المشركين استجارك فأجره حتى يسمع كلام الله ثم أبلغه مأمنه ذلك بأنهم قوم لا يعلمون. So asking for protection from the people that you have come in contact with them. You are entering their land, okay, or they are entering your land, but you're not doing against your own country. Okay, so that's just an example. Now let's talk about the next item, which contributes to this masking. So notice that we're going against the masking concept. We go back to the previous example here. Okay, if we use asylum, then all those meanings in the concept simply disappear. You don't see them in the translation. Okay, and a particular very important component of the legal source, legal culture, has been lost. Okay, it has simply disappeared. Okay, if we use asylum. Now, localization is another factor that contributes to this masking process. Now, look at this quotation from the article is online, is open source. The authors are talking about quality in translation. That's talking about all the aspects, the syntax, morphology, pragmatic, style, everything. Okay, and this is what they said. Ideally, the different agencies involved in the creation of product, who are these people? Localizers, customers, web developers should work in close collaboration to ensure quality. Okay. Even the term translator is not bad. Okay. So they think localizing, or the discourse of localization, many of you are aware of this, they think of translators not as cultural mediators, but only word changers. Sometimes they call them linguists. Okay. They're not even mentioned here. Okay. So professional translators are relegated to this, secondary position, just to be involved in artificial intelligence, to be involved in high-tech thing, to be, involved in web developing, and they forget about the transfer of the legal culture in the translation. And that's, again, one of the factors that contributes towards this masking of conceptual asymmetry. Now, I'm going to skip this. That's another example here. So these are just examples to show that using artificial intelligence in a legal context. Let's just do it very quickly. So this is, do you know this guy? Yes. Oh. Now, Yasser Alwani, this is a journalist by Al Jazeera. He was framed by a Spanish court, and he was sent to prison in 2003 to 7 years in prison. Okay. Now, the reason is that they were vetting the, or tapping his phone, conversation with his phone, and then they found the word Amir. Amir is his brother. You know that Syrians use the name Amir very frequently. Okay. And also, they found in this conversation in the post on WhatsApp, they found the expression Abu Shabab. So this is Abu Shabab is my friend, my mate, okay? And this was interpreted as the leader of the youth, okay? Like a warlord. And you know that this journalist, he was one of the few journalists who interviewed Osama bin Laden, okay? Very few people did. And Alwani was one of them. So he was framed, okay? Clearly he was framed. But what they were using are artificial intelligence and also the translation itself, because the police were outsourcing the translation. I'll give you the link. You can have a look at the whole story in an article. So the second example is this. Now, for people to seek entry into the United States, okay, the American government, listen to this, the American government gave the agents, this is an official document here, okay, for them to use Google Translate to vet, to check, okay, what people got on their phones, okay, using Google Translate, okay. This operation is created to have in the United States, of course, under Trump. So what would you expect from Trump, like this? Now, many people who had the right to enter the United States, either as asylum seekers or refugees or whatever, they were denied. And some of them who were not allowed, who did not have the right to do it, they got access to the United States. Okay. So these are the links. The link of the second example and the link of the third. The article is available open source, okay, if you'd like to have a look at the story of Yasser Alwani. All right. Now, a better story is this, okay? Now, you know this lady, Agnes Kalama. She's the UN Special Rapporteur of Extrajudicial Execution, okay? المقررة الأممية حالة الإعدام خارج القانون. Now she's the chair of Amnesty International. Now, she was talking to the journalist, right, about the case of, because she was in charge of the Jamal Khashoggi's killing, the journalist. Okay, she was in charge of this by the United Nations. And this is what she said to journalists. The Saudi investigation and the trial have been grossly inadequate, failing to meet even minimum international standards. Now, what is she talking about? She is talking about an Islamic court in Saudi Arabia that adopts Sharia law. Okay? Now, this court has got a process. This court has got certain concepts. This court has got certain procedures. Okay? And they are based on Sharia law. Okay? Now, what Agnes Kalama is doing, she is translating in her head, using the functionalist approach, using Scopus theory to talk about what's going on in a court which is based on Sharia law. Okay? Of course, I agree with her. She's French. This exactly would happen in France. She represents international law. This is admissible in international law. Okay? It's admissible even here in Morocco. Because specifically what she was talking about, she said that you cannot, when the trial starts, you cannot go back to the investigation judge, and then bring new people to talk about the same case. Of course you can't. Even here in Morocco, you can't do it. Okay? And the international law, you can't do it. Once the trial starts, the work of the investigation judge starts. You can't go back to it. But can you do it in Saudi Arabia? Of course you can. Okay? And you don't know. So what she is doing, she's simply translating, using the function, what she understands, okay, about international law, to interpret what's going on in a court which is based on Islamic law. Okay? That's another example that blinds people to the conceptual asymmetries in legal translation. Now, the next one and the last one refers to dictionaries, which is the topic of the event, and terminological sort. Now, there are three types of sources that legal translators use. Okay? Now, the first one are bilingual dictionaries that contain purely Western legal terms. Okay? Many of them are available online. One of them is published by the Arabic Language Academy in Egypt. And this is only all the terms in Western type laws, and they are translated into Arabic. We said they're not talking about the translation into Arabic. There's not concern because we're not talking about standardization of terms like Professor Boucheri said this morning. We're talking about concept. So the first type of dictionary simply does not have you. The second one, terminological source related to bilingual glossaries and dictionaries containing both Islamic and Western type legal terms, and one of them is available also on the internet by Ahmed al-Harasha. It's good, okay? Now, but the problem is that it does not give you any indications as to the conceptual asymmetry, okay? And it includes both legal and non-legal terms. So again, this would help you very little. And the third one, we talked about Al-Jamhara, so it's available online. Terminology database to legal terms in Arabic, drawing on Sharia resources, and they give you the translation. One of the translation is the asylum. It's not accurate, okay? But this is very helpful in terms of if you would like to understand the concept in Sharia law. This is very good, okay? Now, a better example is this, okay? That's the Translegal World Law Dictionary online. This is a project, by the way. It's going on. They have reached only 9 languages, I guess, if my memory helps me. And it's good, okay? Now, it's good for the following reasons. It is prepared by jurilinguists, lawyers, linguists. And of course, this is significance, okay? So people who are linguists, translators, but they are also lawyers, okay? So they are aware of the content of the concepts before they put it in the term base. And also it is broken down by fields, okay? Penal law, civil law, the law of the sea, finance law, insurance, and so on, okay? And it provides notes explaining that's exactly what we need when we translate into English from Sharia law. It provides notes explaining source legal, European legal concepts involving asymmetries. And this is what is missing, okay, from the dictionaries that we have, okay? To help the translator understand and explain differences, and it also defines and contextualize. The dictionary does not give you the context, okay? The context can only be introduced in a term base, as we are going to show. However, the bad news is that Arabic and Sharia law is not included here, okay? Because that's a European project, okay? Maybe we need something like this. Okay, now the solution, we need organized and rich term bases that include 2 basic things: definition in both the source and the target text, and the context of in the source text and in the target text, okay? And of course, we're not saying here that the term base is going to help you translate, but not to translate for you, okay? It can give you a suggestion that we're going to see, but the term base does not translate for you. You, the translator, you have to do the job, but you need all the information needed for you to understand the gap, the conceptual gap between the source and the target concept for you to do the work properly, okay? All right, now why terminology and not dictionaries, okay? Terminology refers to term bases that we're going to see, and they focus on specialized terms, but the dictionaries can give you terms that are not needed by you as a legal translator. It includes delimited knowledge. It gives you the domain where the concept is used. Okay? And one entry only accepts one meaning, because we deal in term basis, we deal with concepts. Okay? We don't deal with words. Okay? I've said that all the definitions and the content of the naming that Professor Bouchekhi talked about, we're not concerned. We focus here on the concept themselves. Okay? And also they may be arranged based on conceptual structure or conceptual map. Many term bases do this, and they include the usage in a specific context. All this information should be available in a term base. And of course it deals with special domains of language. There's legal, legal. Now let's take an example just to show you how this works. For example, this is at the beginning of a legal clause from the Penal Code of United Arab Emirates. ما عدم الإخلال بأحكام جريمة القذف المقررة في الشريعة الإسلامية يعاقب بالحبس والغرامة التي لا تجاوز 500 درهم أو بإحلال كل من سب الغير and so on. Oh, so here we're talking about the concept of al-qadf, defamation. Okay. Okay, now look at, sorry, it's a bit small, but you can decipher it. So the first thing you do in a term base is to give the entry a number. Okay. Now the source text is Arabic, so we say that Morocco. You give the transliteration and the transcription, both of them, okay, for people to know how to pronounce the concept of qadf. And then you give a definition with the source where you took it from, not your own definition. Okay? I mean, everybody here has got a conceptual representation of what defamation is. Okay, right? But in a legal context, the gap could be yawning. The gap could be really big. Okay, as in this example here. So you have got the definition. You have got the adjective spoken. It's very important. Okay. So again, if you write something, it is not qadf. It should be spoken. Okay. A spoken defamation, harming a Muslim woman, and so on. Now, part of the definition source, where it is mentioned in the sources of law, is the Quran. وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَأْتُوا بِأَرْبَعِ شُهَدَاءَ فَيَجْلِدُوهُمْ 80 جلدة. That's number 1. وَلَا تَقْبَلُوا مِنْهُمْ شَهَادَةً. That's number 2. وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. That's number 3. So from this verse, you know that we are talking about something very, very serious. Okay? The context, again, you need a source from the context. You can't do it, bring it from things that you have read before. No, you have to name the source of the context where you took the definition or the explanation. It's very important. Okay. Now, what I have written, highlighted in green, is very important. Now, when we talk about freedom of expression, because normally you would confuse defamation with freedom of expression. That's my opinion. Okay? For example, Tawfiq is old. That's an opinion. He's old. Okay? All right. Now, yes. So we speak in the court. Go to the court. Now look at the target. This is very important. Look at the target. Okay. Now the target again. You have to find defamation or slander. You can give a level of equality which is functional. Tashhir. So notice we moved from qadf to tashhir. But look at this. If a defendant stated an opinion, not a fact, then it is not defamation. It's just freedom of expression. Now look at the gap here. So this entry in the term base has given you the gap, okay, and has given you all the information you need as a translator. So it's up to you to find the solution, okay, not the term base. Okay. But this will help you. Either you are going to use transliteration, you are going to include some explanation between brackets, you are going to use a footnote. You are the translator. Okay. But this is all what you need to know this conceptual asymmetry between qadf and slander. Okay. All right. So conclusion. Sorry if I have taken more time than allowed. So to give a rational meaning to Sharia legal terms and preserve the dimensions of source legal culture, and I have underlined this, but that's the most important thing in legal translation. It's not for the reader, the target reader, to understand clearly. No. Okay, so we would like the target reader to understand clearly, yes, but that's only one component is not good enough. The source culture must be preserved. All the concepts that are introduced in the source culture must be preserved, and they should be reflected in the translation. And only a term base can help you do this as a translator. So these are the references, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Alawi, for approaching the legal translation from the conceptual perspective and from professional translation. Thank you. If you have any questions, we'll have 10 minutes before the break. We'll start with the students and then teachers, and could you please be brief to the point? Ask your question directly. Okay, if you have any questions, direct questions.
No beating around the bush.
Okay, now we'll open the list for if you have any questions.
Let's take them one by one. Take the questions about one by one.
One by one, or
Yeah. Face to face.
as you like.
Face to face.
Yeah.
Okay, since yes, Mr. Barbizi, yes. Direct questions, please.
Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Jamal Barbzi. I'm a PhD, second year PhD student of linguistics. I'd like to thank all the organizing committee for holding this conference today, and of course all the participants. And thank you, Mr. Alawi, for this insightful presentation. My question is related to the text. I mean, the main objective of translation is to provide some kind of achieve some sort of sameness. But this degree of sameness differs from one translator to the other according to their linguistic knowledge, cultural knowledge. 2 months ago, a friend of mine who had to publish an article, sorry sir, but I have to put this in context. An article related to Islamic studies. It's about istidlal and al-muwatta. But he said, you have to translate this for me because you are a PhD student, English. I said, I'm not a translator. Of course, translation is a very difficult task, and human translation is difficult. But first, I tried to translate machine.
What's your question?
Okay, my question is, when I translated the text, which is full of Islamic concepts, I said, look, this is my text. It's not your text because I can see the mismatches between the source text and the target text, but you can't see. So the question is, who does the new text belongs to? I mean, does it belong to the original owner or to this translator? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now if I understand your question properly, is that you use the internet to translate legal terms like istinzal. That, as we said, there are too many of them, like istikhlaf. Okay, and you're not sure whether the text that you produce belongs to you as a translator or belongs to the commissioner or the person who asks you, okay, before you making it public. Now, any translation that you do is not your text. Okay, this is contentious in literary translation. When you translate a story or a novel and you claim the copyright, there are many people who claim that you have the right to have your name there, and you have even the right to enjoy the royalties, any money which is made out of the translation. But in legal translation, if you are talking about a book, it's the same. Okay, but if you are talking about a document that would be introduced into the courts of justice to decide the life of a person, okay, then this is not your document. Okay, the documents all the time belongs to the commissioner. If a lawyer asks you to translate a document that he would be using in a trial in the court, then the document belongs to the lawyer, not to you. Okay. Now, the point relating to the use of the internet, okay, if the commissioner is not happy with the translation, he would return it to you, or maybe he will not pay you. Okay. Now, it's this. That's exactly what we are talking about in this presentation. Is the heavy reliance on artificial intelligence does not work all the time in legal translation. It may very well, work in media translation, sometimes in technical translation. In literary translation, it doesn't work, okay? Because literature is about style, okay? And style, there are no rules. There are no rules for style, okay? There are rules for grammar, for morphology, but for style, the variation of the surface structure cannot be, regulated by rigid rules. You can talk about syntax, you can have rigid rules. Structure, you can have rigid rules. But for style, you can't. Okay? So, or at least you need a grammar of surface structure and never a grammar of underlying representation as we do in syntax. So, my advice to you is do not use Google Translate in legal translation. Okay? And when we talk about the term base, this is very important. We are not talking about the fact that all the words that you translate in legal translation must be defined in the term base. No. Okay? You need the term base only when the translation that you produce is not good enough and you need certain repairs. That's where we need the understanding, which is information provided by the term base. Not all the words in legal discourse need to be defined in the way we have shown. We're talking about only the concepts that are crucial to understanding the legal source culture.
Thank you. Professor Khalloufi.
Happy to see you, Sinari.
Hello.
I was impressed by your presentation.
Thank you.
I have two things. One remark for which I wouldn't like any feedback, just for reflection. And the second one is a direct question. The question is the term base as a tool of working applied in other fields apart from the field of law? That's something I'm learning about. I invite your reflection for the last example you gave in Arabic, and that shows really the failure of AI as a tool for sorting out problems of translation. If you put that term in Google, God knows what you get out as a result.
Thank you, Professor Khalloufi.
Okay, thank you, Professor Khalloufi. The term base, as I said before, normally when you translate, we're not saying that dictionaries are useless, but sometimes they stop being useful. That's all. Okay. We all use dictionaries. We use online dictionaries when we translate as professional translators. We use glossaries. Okay. But sometimes, when you feel that a concept in legal term is not really conspicuous enough, then you need to go to an advanced level. And that's where, and this is the reason, by the way, why the United Nations started the term base, 6 years ago, and it's still an ongoing project in international law, not in legal translation we're talking about, which is less of a problem than the asymmetry that we talked about involving Sharia law and Western type of laws. I think that the same would happen, okay, but I have got an axe to grind with what Mr. Bouchekhi said this morning. Before we talk about the naming of a particular term, okay, then we have to ask the question, why should we translate in the first place? Okay? He was talking about the naming into Arabic. That's what Professor Bouchekhi is talking about. Let me give you an example. Suppose, for example, would like to build a dictionary, from French into Arabic for dentistry, for dentist.
Yeah.
who is going to use this in Morocco? Can you think of anyone? No. Translators to translate for themselves, to keep themselves busy. So that's the problem.
Yeah, the functionality of it.
Exactly. What are we going to do with this dictionary when you're trying? We know that all dentists work in French, all students of dentistry work in French. And what am I going to do with dictionary translate for me into Arabic from French? Okay.
Waste of time.
Yes, but it's not the case when you talk about Sharia law translated into English. Okay. So the term base is needed when it is needed. When you feel that dictionaries, all the other resources, terminological do not work or cease to work, okay, then you have to resort to term bases. If there aren't any, then you have to build some.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, the last question. Let's take some. Yes. Students' question then.
Well, hello, sir. My name
Just ask your question.
Yes. My question is, how can beginner translators who are just starting this field account for all of these issues, the term base and all of these questions? And the second part of my question is, how would we deal with artificial intelligences in this field for someone who is just a beginner? Because they would need help and to minimize the margin of error. So how would they take that into consideration?
Thank you.
Oh, question number one. To translate properly, you simply cannot do it when you are studying translation. Even when you graduate as a translator. Okay? When you graduate in a program of translation, you cannot translate professionally to a professional level. Okay? You need to get your feet wet. You need experience. Okay? And when you buy experience, you bump into problems, you solve them, you ask colleagues, you do your research, because you need experience to translate properly. Okay? That's number one. Second one, do not start with legal translation. Okay? Because legal translation changes people's lives. It's a game changer. Okay? So we talked about the journalist who was sent to prison for 7 years for something that he didn't know. He's simply framed through translation. Okay? So start with media, start with maybe literary translation, which is very difficult as well. And that's question number one. Second question, artificial intelligence must be used not instead of the other tools of the translator. It should be along with. It simply helps you do your work. Okay? But if you focus everything, okay, on artificial intelligence, you will bump into problems 100%. Okay? So use artificial intelligence, use the source available online, use Google Translate, as long as they help you in addition to your training, the tools that you use, your skills, your proficiency, and so on. But never think of artificial intelligence will replace humans one day. No. Even when you produce, for example, very basic document, you translate it into English or into Arabic, then you need a human translator or reviser to post-edit it. You cannot give it to a client. Why should the commissioner pay you if you use Google Translate and give him or her back document? Okay, where are your efforts? So the human factor is there to stay. Many people believe that maybe you change the way you do your job as a translator. It is affected by artificial intelligence. Okay, so but use it together with the traditional tools rather than instead of the traditional tools.
Thank you. The last question, maybe, yes.
The mic.
No.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Professor Mahdawi. I'm very happy to see you. You were my professor at Trade University one time. Thank you. My question, so I will be very brief. You have mentioned the term-based translation. My question is, does it take into consideration the difference between literal meaning, lexical meaning, and figurative meaning within the context? And the second question, are there any limitations for term-based translation? And thank you so much for this interesting presentation.
Okay, now, question number one, you have got the answer in your question. Of course, you have to take into consideration all the aspects of a term, okay? In the context of legal translation, the term should reflect how Muslim scholars and jurists think about the concepts, okay? Not how the West would like us to think about the concept as they did in the translation of Kitab al-Hidayah by Hamilton. That's exactly what they did in the translation of Kitab al-Hidayah. They want Muslims to understand Islam according to the colonizers, okay? That's exactly what they did. Okay. Now, for you as a translator, you have to make sure, that's what we said, Al-Jamhara is very important, it gives you the actual meaning of Islamic law concepts in Arabic. And that's more than enough for you to understand, because in translation, the first requirement is understanding. If you cannot understand it, you cannot translate it, very simply. Okay. Now, the second one, the limitation for the term base, is that whenever you start building a term base, it's a huge project. It involves a lot of work. For example, for one similar to the one that we're talking about, you need people from translation studies, you need jurists, people from law, you need linguists. You need a big team to build a viable term base, especially in legal translation.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Professor Alawi, for all these answers. Now we'll have a break of 15 minutes, and we welcome you to a couple of all of the guests. Thank you.
Conference on translation and the compiling of dictionaries. Before I kick off this panel, I just want to reiterate my gratitude to Professor Larousse and his team on investing time and effort to organize this interesting conference. So it's also my absolute pleasure to have the chance to introduce three distinguished speakers who have developed a wonderful career in the area of translation. So on my right, Professor Kinish and Professor Mitni, and Professor Arwani is going to join us in a few seconds. So, before I give the floor to Professor Kinish, I just want to remind you that Professor Kinish is a senior professor of the Faculty of Letters and the Humanities in Kinetra, though he is retired now, but he is still active and he is still supervising PhD students and master students as well, and is still participating actively in different scientific events. I give him the floor to say more about himself and then his floor is yours, Kinish.
Thank you, Mr. President, for sparing me the trouble of reading the, as you put it, the lengthy bio I sent you. So I'm not going to say anything about that stuff, except what you've already said. I am a retired person, happy in my retirement. I wasn't at the beginning. And then I just like for the anecdotes, I developed this attitude of I've been saying this, like looking very serious as well about it. I've been saying, look, I am in London. I don't want anything to do with the word, but when you have as a friend, Professor Larousse Mohammed deal with this faculty as a friend, they don't let you alone. And it's like it helped me to come again and to feel this kind of atmosphere which I have not been through for. I guess I was for a little while in July, because I took like a kind of a sabbatical since last January, preparing for my retirement. meant to, and also, you know, that's the part of the Bible. The lengthy one that you don't want to give. Preparing, I was like fighting for getting an extension of 2 years, which was refused to me. I applied twice and stuff like this. And I hated as well the system for doing this. I mean, asking you for things that you could not do. They were asking me that I should apply 1 year before, during a year wherein everyone was not sure that they're going to survive COVID-19. Am I going to think about adding 2 years? 1 year before you should have added. That was the year of COVID. So that's the story. So that's me. Happy to be back again and happy to be among you. And I thank the organizing committee for inviting me, for making room for an older person. I found that. Not an older person. An older person to tell you a little bit about something which started for me just like a joke. I was not really sure that I will have a lot to say. I mean, looking at it from afar, when Professor Lewis and myself started talking about it, and when Saif, Professor Aksmar, got in touch with me, and I told him, what is it that you want to talk about? He was, huh? And I told him, on dictionaries. On dictionaries. And then I find out that probably there are certain historical things to say about dictionaries in English and stuff like this. So the story started like this. So I'm going to give you like a historical snapshot. Very small, even though that Professor Alawi last night reminded me, or warned me that this is longer than what I was claiming, and it's gonna probably take me more than 15 minutes. I will try to. Do I have 15 minutes?
Okay. Will I take your time, Professor?
Oh, okay. Thank you. So it's. I'm going to talk about dictionaries, a historical kind of briefing. A historical briefing. It's really. We shared this point of view last night, myself and Professor Alawi. This is kind of covering a huge area of research. I mean, to talk about the history of dictionary making, both on the European front and on the Arab front, is huge and covers quite. Let me put it this way: numerous fields. So I will be just touching on things, not really going into that much detail. I don't know. So the things that I'm going to share with you are about 6 points. One is the introduction. The introduction, as I always shared with you, an introduction general as can be. The other one is the bio part, which is related to this. So my personal interest in dictionary. It's not really. had a problem with the translation. I find the French word la dictionnerique ولا العربية المعجمية better than saying dictionary making. It's so it's in dictionary, an interest so it's a personal interest that brings me to talk about these things. And then I move on to this an issue that I'm calling the raison d'être of dictionaries. Why do we have dictionaries? I mean, people should be happy. We use the language, we talk, we communicate and stuff like this. But then, all of a sudden, at some point in history, for every kind of language, people decided to have dictionaries and stuff like that. So the raison d'être. So I'm going to be as brief as can be, talking about the two experiences: the European one, as represented by the English one, and the French one, as brief as can be. Yeah. And the Arab one, why dictionaries? Talking about the time that they came into there, and then I'll be talking about the success of the experience, the success of the experience, both on the European front and also on the Arabian front. Just it's very hard.
Yeah.
I am on the Arabian front, so I'll be saying something. Giving a little details of these two, and then afterwards is the one before last thing that I have to share with you is where to from here. When I'm saying here, I'm talking about present day, nowadays, today. I mean, where to, where, because from what I'll be talking to you about, I think there are new things which are happening. And I will end up my presentation with the issue that is like, I was provoked into dealing with this one because just last week, because of this International Day of the Arabic Language, I received, I saw it on Facebook, it's on YouTube, it's everywhere. Arabic language is a language that has 12 million words. I don't know. That's what we say. So it's the issue of the word number. I'll be talking about it, and I think that there is a fallacy or fallacies that probably should be there too. More specifically in present day. More specifically. So probably I'll skip the introduction. I have references. The introduction, I'll skip all of this. Just like to say that definitely our meeting today on translation and on bilingual as it's titled, on bilingual dictionaries is very important for the ELT business. And we definitely know that as far as ELT is concerned, and as far as not only ELT, but any LLT, language teaching. I was looking for the other L, but there is none. So as far as language teaching is concerned, be it French or Arabic or what have you, there is always a need to start in teaching these languages with this kind of a basis where to start from. So we have all levels in all languages. I mean, despite the changes that have been made by this CFRL, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, which changed things from this intermediate beginner, and you name it, to this A1, A2, B1, B2, and stuff like this. So we all of these agree, and TEFL, and you name it, all of these agree that there is all textbooks for teaching languages. They all have vocabulary as a basis. So we all have lists of words. If not, I mean, you can call them glossaries, you can call them lists, and call them dictionaries. Many dictionaries depending on the level. So it's very important. I mean, these two things are very important. It's also very important for language teaching in general that we should pay a very frequent visit to translation, to other languages. I mean, very few are very rare. Very rare. Very rare are the language teachers who do not speak more than one language. And it's, when you find someone saying and maintaining that they speak only someone teaching languages, bilingual languages, saying that they speak only one language, I can swear they are lying. And if they are Moroccans, then you can double swear. But they are lying because we are a multilingual society. I mean, we have people speaking more than one language. So this bilingualism is there. And so the meeting is to the point, and that's what makes me say towards that end there and saying, oh, ELT teachers. Why? Because English is progressing. English is despite what is said about the growth, the growing influence of China and its economy, and you name it, English is always there. Even in China, they use English, they teach in English, they do research in English, they publish in English. So English is there. That's why I'm saying, for ELT years, tomorrow is ours. So ELT, we have to work on this kind of English language teaching. Is a field that is definitely meant to grow. Moving on to the second point, which is part of my bio, the personal interest, is It relates to the fact that I have been involved ever since, probably you could call it the beginning of this reform. I've been involved into a research laboratory, le laboratoire langage et société, wherein we have been doing a lot of work on lexicology, lexical terms, terminology, translation, so as far as dictionary making is concerned, we have organized, probably that was way back in 2007, 2008, we have organized 2 meetings on dictionaries, 1 meeting on dictionaries and translation. I was, as part of this laboratoire, I was you could say it, an active member of a research group, Lexiter. C'est le lexique et terminologie, Lexiter. I was a member of that one, an active one. I'm still, I guess. Even despite the fact that the law does not talk about the status of retired people as members of laboratories, we're not mentioned. The law talks about permanent members and talk about active associate members. So we are kind of I'm just like forcing myself as a member of this laboratory. So I'm still a member of Lexiter. I'm also a member of, a founding member as well, something we founded in as part of the work of Langage Société way back in 2011, which we call the REBAT, le réseau maghrébin des technolectes. It's like this ESP counterpart, if you call it, the language used by mechanics, by people for the professional REBAT. And I am also a member of a group of people within this working on making a dictionnaire maghrébin des sciences humaines. Dictionnaire maghrébin des sciences humaines. So that's really my interest in there, and of course the conferences, as I've already told you. So to start with the raison d'être of dictionaries. In my readings and in my handling throughout all of these times, I raised this question: why do we have dictionaries? And I've come to this certainty that dictionaries have their raison d'être, have different raison d'être for the Arabs, from those for the Europeans, for the Europeans. So for the Arabs, the primary reason why we have dictionaries is culture. Arabs, by the way, were ahead in terms of time in making dictionaries before the Europeans, before all Europeans. I mean, Arabs made glossaries, let's call them glossaries for the time being, because they took time to call it a dictionary. I'll tell you a little bit about it. But they've been, I think the first dictionary were published in the first 100 years of Islam. As soon as Islamic authorities, starting with the Caliph Uthman, maybe earlier, maybe with Ali ibn Abi Talib probably, because all of you know that the Caliph Ali ibn Abi Talib was the first one to ask for a grammar of Arabic, to make it, and it was called Nahu Ali. 14 pages, which were made for Arabic, the grammar, and it was made for non-native speakers. Arabic grammar is not made for Arabs. It's made for the non-native speakers of Arabic. It has always been for non-native speakers of Arabic, even though this kind was lost sight of throughout the whole thing. So the dictionary as well was, dictionary, the craft of dictionary making was resorted to at the beginning of this Khalifa for cultural reasons. Before, up to the very first year of the Caliphate, orality was the predominant one. All of us have been students of Arabic literature and that stuff, and you know about the mu'allaqat. They've never been mu'allaqat. We call them mu'allaqat, but they were like spoken to people during those cultural, those musans and cultural meetings. So it was an oral thing. So it was the kind of culture, and there grew a need with with the incoming, with the coming into Islam, into Arabic countries, into the Gulf and stuff like this, many people came from other languages, from other cultures. So by the end of the 1st century, people became aware that the Arab culture, if not committed to writing, is going to disappear. So probably the very first thing for doing even dictionaries in terms of words and stuff like this, it has to do with this. Definitely there are other people who would tell you that actually there was a need for that dictionary because even for those Arab people, not all of them know the meanings of all the words used in the Quran. And there is this hadith, correct hadith, wherein somebody, I don't remember exactly the thing, but it's definitely somebody who was reacting to the use of this Jahannam. Because the people of Hijaz never used Jahannam before. It's a Hebrew word, or maybe Syriac, probably a Syriac word, which was, and many words in the Quran were not known by the Muslims of Mecca, by those first Muslims, and so there was a need to keep a record of the meanings of many words in the Quran which were not parts of maybe they were part of some kind of, you could call it the south as opposed to the north of the Gulf area. Just as we have, maybe we still have this kind of situation of saying in the language things have not changed. When you look at Moroccan Arabic, wherein you have, I think, some people call it Khizzo, some people call it Sfrenia, some people call it Jada. We still have this thing. It's a really an unchangeable characteristic of language. So that was what was obtaining in Hijaz. So there was this kind of cultural thing, and there was this kind of the Quran. And we want people to be sure that they are getting the meaning of that thing. So religion was one of the commissioners. Religion was one of the commissioners of making dictionaries to make sure that those people out there who don't speak that language, who are not native speakers of Arabic, know what it means, and they don't get it wrong. So that's the very first dictionaries were driven. I'm calling them dictionaries between quotes because they were not calling them dictionaries at that time when they came into being. So there was religious, and finally, I mean, with time, not at the beginning, there were traces of it, as I was saying here, because at the beginning, as I was saying, the one that was really predominant is the religious reason. But afterwards, people started being afraid of this Arabic language growing unclean, not pure. There is a purist movement, and that's what we have even until today. Anything that people do in the name of Arabic, they want to preserve it as a pure language. This is what is done even in translation, in what Professor Al-Alawi was telling us earlier on, and what Professor Sheikh was saying earlier on. Because when we talk about pure, we're talking about preserving the meaning, preserving the context and the culture behind it, preserving the way of naming the thing behind it and stuff like this, which is Arabic. Pure is really more than just saying it belongs to the dictionary. No, it belongs to the people as well. It belongs to you. So these are like the three basic things. There may be others, but these are the three basic things which I think, personally, that are behind the development of the craft of dictionary making on the Arab front. On the European front, there are as well three reasons. Because the Europeans came to dictionary making, came to this idea of committing writing, of committing words to paper, to dictionary and stuff, became quite late. So one was linked politically in some sense. It was linked to the rise of a central government in both the two countries that interest us, but this is true about what was happening in Germany, what was happening in Spain, what was happening in Italy. That's the European, the word that we know, is to protect the language of the king. Because there were two languages. The common people were using their own languages. But the upper class, the aristocracy, have their own language, which is very clean, which does not contain a lot of slang. The rogue and the vagabond language in some sense was not there. So dictionaries were there for doing this. And that's why they had schooling. I mean, schooling when it developed in France and in Italy developed this. So to protect the language of the king was the main reason. So it was not really It was not really religious. Some of the English dictionaries, which were made as early, were, maybe I should delay this a little bit, and I'll tell you. I'm cheating, if I have time. And the other one, all those dictionaries, they came into being on the European front. And here I'm talking a period of time, starting with the 16th century. So they came very late to this dictionary making. Before, and when I'm saying also here dictionary making, I'm talking about monolingual dictionaries, not bilingual ones. The Arabs did not really keep a record of having this kind of tradition of bilingual dictionaries. They must have, because I have read in many books, I have read people blaming the Syriac people. I mean, it's called Syriac, the Syriac. The language in which the Bible was first written and stuff. So it's an Ashuri, or what we do call the Ashuri, the Syriac people, who served as the mediators between Greek knowledge and its transfer to Arabic. It came from Greek, through Syriac, and then it landed in Arabic. But there is no record of this Syriac thing. Greek, Arabic. All the writings, all the thinking of the Greek looks like as if it's the Arabs who did it. No. Okay, also Parsi. Persians also did the job and stuff like this. So I was saying this bilingualism, there was no trace of it in the early time, in the early period. There was definitely, for the Arabs, there was definitely a certain awareness that many of the educated people, many of those people involved in the craftsmanship, or a womanship, the craftship, can you say it? Craftness, of making, doing pieces of literature, philosophy, and you name it. We all know this, but not of an Arab origin. The majority of them were either Parsis, Turkish, Hindis, maybe also Amazigh. But they've been writing in excellent Arabic. But at the beginning of dictionary making with the Arabs, there were many So there were many works who were interested into this side and were providing those would-be poets, would-be writers, would-be scientists, providing them with words which are Arabic for saying things, for naming things and stuff like this. If you look at the specialized works on Al-Mu'jam al-Arabi and its history, you will find hundreds of names which had been produced between probably towards the end of the Caliphate period, towards the end, not towards the end, but starting with Uthman ibn Affan, up until the end of the Abbasid, the 13th century. Hundreds of books have been produced for pinning down, had the preciseness that is needed in naming things and in handling words and stuff like this, so as to make it easier for those non-Arabs who are poets, very famous, who produce very famous, you name it, they produce wonderful things while they were not native speakers. So on the European side, they were trying to educate the people. All the introductions of all those dictionaries produced between 1600, let's call it this way, 1600 and 1700 and so, up front, they're there to educate people. I will tell you about, to educate people, and definitely to do business. That's something which was missing on the Arabs. When you read literature on dictionary making with the Arabs, those who made dictionaries did not make a fortune of their dictionaries, because the copies available were very few, and so people were kind of taking classes with the one who made the dictionary, and they were like by rote. They were learning the words by rote. They don't have copies. That's why there is not, manuscript production was not there. I mean, for the anecdote, as you know, printing in the Arab world started only towards the 18th century. The printing machine was in the Muslim world towards the middle of the 13th century or the 12th century, with the beginning of the immigration of the Jews into the Muslim world. Jews of Spain tried to bring it here in the side of, was independent of the Ottomans. They tried to bring it here. Our side, whatever comes from Bilad al-Kufr is not to be allowed in. They took it to Turkey. They took the printing machine to Turkey. I think it was Suleiman al-Fatih. And the Jews were allowed to get it in on the condition that it should not print anything having to do with the Muslims. It was forbidden.
Yes.
It was forbidden for the Jews to print things Muslim with these machines, and they had to wait until the 18th century, until the time when the Ottoman Empire's might was kind of got weak. So there was no possibility of doing business on the Arab front, but on the European front, people were doing business. You find on those dictionaries, people making advertisements, asking potential patrons, individuals who want to be like the king, who want to belong up there, asking them to subscribe for buying pages of the dictionaries, because they were selling them in pages. They were like 10, 14 pages, and then they subscribe to the next issue, and for the third issue and stuff like this. It's a very interesting mix. The dictionaries I'm telling you about are available on Google Books. All of them are available on Google Books. It's an interesting journey and stuff like this. So that's what I have to say about the raison d'être dictionaries. And this doing business is the most important one, I guess. Is like a 16th century in Europe, and we will see why people started seeing into it a way and means for making money. Those making dictionaries. You were doing very good business because people made a lot of dictionaries at that time, and they were not also calling them. So how successful were things as far as making dictionaries is concerned? On the European front, when you look at the countries on the European front, we can distinguish, at least for those which are of interest to us, France and England and at the western side. I guess all the rest. No, it's Eastern Europe was like as backward as, if you allow me to use the word backward, as our Islamic countries are, as soon as we are into this what historians are calling the second big historical change. I mean, after the building or the setting up of the Roman Catholic Church, the second one, which started with these European countries falling into small countries, and these countries were really characterized by the fact that, I'm calling them countries, I will show this other things, were characterized by this fact that they have one shared language and they also have one shared land. Those countries among these ex-Roman Catholic Church lands which did not satisfy this criterion of one shared land took a lot of time to catch up with the others. The example of Italy. Italy stayed as a city-state until the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. Germany, the same thing. I mean, it's 19th century with Bismarck. It's really kind of reunited. But two countries singled out themselves up there. The first one to single out itself is France. I mean, France came into being as a separate country and stayed as such ever since that time, with some truncation on the ages on its territory, but France stayed there since 1841, when there was this kind of agreement supervised by the Pope, the Roman Catholic Pope, and they called it La Francia Occidentale. That's Latin. It's not pronounced like a Spanish, it's really in Latin, Francia Occidental, as opposed to other Francias, Because Francia at the beginning was referring to something having to do with le parler. It was not really French as we know it, but it was really, all of them were speaking Latin, some form of Latin. So La Francia came in 1841, and we all know through our classes of this British sale and stuff like this, that England came into being, I mean, properly speaking, after the Roman invasion in 1011, or 10-6. I don't know, I put 1011, because 1011 was the beginning of the rule of these Tudor and Stuart families. Because ever since, they were one thing. So ever since that time, I mean, for France and for things, rulers probably changed, but the land remained the same. The historical, the geographical roqa stayed the same. I mean, they stayed the same as kind of a state, as a nation. For Muslims, we call it ummah. It stayed the same. Who generally speaking, they speak the same language. Even though, like for French, I may take even for English, you could those of you could watch movies made by Liverpoolians, by Liverpoolians, as opposed to those made by Londoners. It's true. I came with Brezhnev, a movie. I mean, it's available. I think it's available. Brezhnev, where they're using this northern accent of English, as opposed to the London one. It's huge. French on the French front. There was a movie which was produced in 2009, which signaled that the dichotomy existing between the southern version of French as opposed to the northern one. It's Bienvenue chez les Ch'tis. You should watch that movie. You saw it? Yeah, Bienvenue chez les Ch'tis. Which showed how big the difference between the two. But generally speaking, they still maintain that people are speaking the same language. And the other thing that happened on the European front, which is of interest, is this 16th century. For many people, they would say it started before. And when you look at the history of England, it starts before the 16th century with this agrarian reform. I think it started towards the end of the 14th century, wherein they reworked the division of the land, the agrarian, to prepare for the thing. Because actually at that time, this bourgeoisie that I'm talking about as rising, and in there I really mean, they came into control of things. 16th century, they were the ones, they started having their share with Cromwell and stuff like that. They started having their share in power with the aristocrats, but they were there before. And I just check for England, if you are interested, since you are students of the English department, there is an interesting book. It's available on the internet. It was available. I don't know if it's still. Who Owns Britain? Very interesting book. It tells you about the story. It tells you, how it come that Britain, the land in Britain is still probably owned by only 16 people or 20 people, families. The rest is benefiting one another. So in the 16th century, Europe, Western Europe, knew two things. The rise of the bourgeoisie coming into power and the coming into being of dictionaries. On the British side, we had these dictionaries. No, not this one. What happened? We had like these 5 dictionaries. The very first one is Caudry's dictionary. It was not called dictionary. It was called a table alphabetical. It's a table alphabetical because Caudry was following, into making this dictionary, was following what was being done before him. Because before him, people were only producing glosses of Latin and English, French and English. But not a table alphabetical, and they say that it's something that did not really contain many words. When it was published, there was only something like 600 words in it. And this is the one who was like, for the anecdote, it was claimed that it was made. The dictionary was made basically for 2 things. And then Caudry was a priest, a Puritan, Protestant priest, and he was also a schoolmaster. He was a teacher. He was also a teacher, and they have noted in London. They have noticed in London there was an anecdote happened. There was a merchant coming from Manchester to London at a time when France and England were at war. And so the guy coming from Manchester was using a tongue, as they would put it there, a tongue which was different from that spoken in London. And he was imprisoned because he was thought to be a French spy coming from Manchester. I mean, it took him a lot of time, from what they say, to prove that he is not French. That he is not French, especially that he was naming things à la Manchester. Like he used words for eggs, which Londoners never heard of, and you name it. And he was caught for this. And so this Cody wrote his dictionary for this. And he also wrote his dictionary to fight the mess that was existing in London at that time. Some people were using some English with some German, some English with some Scandinavian, some English with some French. There was a mess. And they were using what he called in his dictionary, I think it's there, hard words. It's in the full title, it contains the hard words. So he wants to make these hard words to put them into plain English, plain. A word which is kind of, it's not the plain we know. Yeah, it's another plain. Plain stylishly, stylistically. It should go hand in hand with the language of languages. So these were the dictionaries. Probably I will leave this for the public. The boss. The boss. Enjoy the Arab side of it.
Take your time.
If you want me to stop, I'll stop. So, target population, as I was saying, of these dictionaries is very specific. Ladies in the first place. Ladies, whether they were learned or not learned, Codri is a name that's not only Codri, but the first 3 dictionaries were made, they were targeting ladies. Ladies as being like the victims, if you can call it so. The likely people to fall prey to using non-English and to do harm to English. Teach them proper and plain English, whether they are learned or not learned, whether like aristocracy or not aristocracy. Ladies, illiterate man of course, because he was like didactical, pedagogical dictionary at the beginning. Merchants, because they were not using the language that they should be using, the English one, and definitely learned men. Some learned men were lost into these foreign things. The objectives, as I was saying, because I said this, were to clear the linguistic message. So the business of business that started in the 16th century is still thriving today. With the 16th century, it was carried out with the growth as well, with the coming into play of lexicography. So dictionaries are still very successful. Proof to this, people are still buying Webster, buying heritage dictionaries, still buying Larousse, Le Robert. It's a lot of money that is being there. Of course, other factors are helping. Something which I refer to as that has to be stopped through what we can call la décolonisation. Decolonizing our language and our doing things. It's a business which is thriving. On the Arab front, so the dictionaries started first as like a dependent on one key, dependent on Arabic and the religious background. Had the trade, the making, not the business, not the money making, but making first century. The interesting thing, we probably have not to take longer or to abuse of your kindness. I will leave the rest for later on, but I will be happy to say this. They started for like nearly 3 centuries, calling it Kitab. It was Kitab. And we have the first dictionary, it was called Kitab al-Ain. The second dictionary was called Kitab al-Jim. There was always Kitab until the 3rd century, where it came into play, a word that was used in the 1st century. It was used, but not for dictionaries. It was used for talking about the alphabet. معجم حروف الهجاء. The very first book, which was made around beginning of 100, معجم حروف الهجاء, and it was not for dictionary. The first time that the word معجم was used for referring to a معجم was in the third century. It was in the 3rd century. It's just the 3rd Hijri century, but it's the 12th century AD, and it was used by it's a very strange word. The non-Arabs أكيد. الفيروزابادي. معجم. الفيروزابادي was the, no, الفيروزابادي was for القاموس. اسمه قاموس المحيط. قاموس المحيط is the 8th century Hijri. الفيروزابادي was the one who made it, and ever since, scholars of that period liked the word. And then they started using the word al-qamus for this Arabic dictionary. One thing which I really want to say, probably is this issue of word number. I do believe, and as a reaction, I want to make it as public as can be, saying that there is this language which has this number of a higher number than the others. I think that we cannot talk like this in the void about it. It has to be the case that we should take a dictionary, because it's possible to count the numbers of entries in a dictionary, but it's not possible to count the numbers of a language. Languages borrow, languages change. There is a lot of borrowing. The English of today, for example, is a language which was probably 90% poorer than it is now at the beginning or towards the end of the 15th century. Even at the beginning of the 16th century, it was very, very poor as a language, was poorer. So my statement is, I would probably say that the language that is more likely to have the highest number is the language in which borrows a lot. And it's a language wherein, wherein we have a kind of a development on the 3 fronts: the cultural front, the economic front, and the political front. If there is no development on these fronts, you don't have to have many words. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again for your enlightening and entertaining presentations on the development of dictionaries in both the Arab and Western worlds. So our next speaker is Professor Mohammed Mediouni. He's a professor at the Fahd High School of Translation, Tangier. Professor Mediouni is a research interest. Could you just please speak here? So Professor Mediouni's research interests include terminology, lexicography, legal translation, and translation of the Quran. He published intensively in this regard, and he has been teaching translation since 2007 at King Fahd School. In 2014, he was appointed head of the Department of Arabic, English, French translation, and in 2016 was also appointed vice dean of the same, or vice director of the same school. The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على مولانا رسول الله وآله وصحبه. Honorable Dean, honorable officers, dear students, first of all I would like to warmly thank my dean for giving me this opportunity to participate in this conference, well-attended conference, international conference, which brings together experts in the field of lexicography and translation. So I'm pleased to be here with you, and also pleased to be in a city Meknes, in which I have never been before. My presentation is straightforward compared with the previous ones, in the sense that I won't talk about the history of lexicography, and I won't talk about the Discourse theory, but I will talk about lexicography from the translation perspective, in the sense that we'll focus on translation problems and solutions opted for by means of lexicographic products, bilingual dictionaries, general dictionaries, and especially the specialized dictionaries. So the title, Can Phraseology Replace Examples in Specialized Dictionaries? The Case of Arabic English Dictionary of Morocco. Now this is the title of my presentation. The content is as follows. First of all, I will set the tone, the scene. Here I will borrow the expression to set the scene and to set the tone. These two expressions are used by Basil Hatim. In an informative expository text, you start by setting the scene, and in an argumentative text, you start by setting the tone. So I will start by setting the scene by giving definitions, by giving the situation, describing the situation in monolingual and bilingual lexicography as far as phraseology and examples are concerned. Then I will move to setting the tone, which I have an idea, I criticize, I will call for a better treatment for phraseology, in bilingual specialized dictionaries. So it is appropriate to start with definition, especially in the context of lexicography, because as Henri Bejoin says, the main aim of lexicography and lexicographic products is to provide meanings. Why do we consult dictionaries? To look at the meanings of words. This is the main aim, but there are other, of course, we have also other functions. So the presentation is about the, so I will define first example, then phraseology, because the title, Can Phraseology Replace Examples in Dictionaries, in Specialized Dictionaries? So I will define example, phraseology, and then general specialized bilingual dictionaries, or specialized dictionaries. So example is defined as the illustrative phrase or sentence usually given in italics to elucidate the different senses of a lexical unit. This is a definition of example. So we know, we consult dictionaries, we know that we find examples. Examples, especially in general dictionaries. So after the entry word, al-kalima al-madkhal, you have the phonological transcription, sometimes morphological information, then the definition. And right after the definition, you have the example. The example can be complete, full sentence, or just a phrase that you say, nominate group or phrasal group, a phrase. Usually given in italics. I mean, this is a typographical convention to set up the examples in the entry. So, I mean, this is one of the functions of examples, to elucidate the different senses of the entry word. But you have the lexicographers, researchers in the field say that it has other functions. They have other functions, like giving more information about the syntagmatic combinations of the word. They call it lexical valency, semantic valency of the entry units. They also, examples give information about the pragmatic information, restrictions on use. Is it formal, informal? I mean, so these are the functions of the examples in dictionaries, especially in monolingual dictionaries. Now, phraseology. Phraseology, I will define it in terms of its intention and extension. Intention means the distinctive features, and extension, the subordinate concepts. So, in terms of intention, it means the set of phrases used by a particular group. What is phraseology? It is the set of phrases used by a particular group. It includes, its intention, it includes collocations, mutalazimat lafdiyah, idioms, and fixed expressions. So collocations are the combinations of words which occur frequently, We say to pay a visit, to deliver a speech, to break the law, to issue shares. متلازمات لفظية. خرق القانون. So these are collocations, part of phraseology. We have also idioms, combinations of words or group of words whose meanings is different from the meanings of the individual words. To kick the bucket, to pass away, like a bull in a china shop, and so on and so on. It's raining cats and dogs, idiomatic expressions, idioms. And you have fixed expressions, also set of words, a group of words, but semantically they are transparent. The elements of the fixed expressions, the elements of the fixed expression keep their meanings. For example, when we say in witness query as a matter of fact, fixed expression. So this is phraseology from the lexicographic perspective as defined by Howard Jackson and others. Phraseology also from the perspective of terminography. I mean terminography, this is specialized lexicography. It means the set of expressions. This is the definition that you'll find in Terbium. This is the online data bank, Canadian data bank. The set of expressions surrounding terms in specialized discourse. They include collocations, technical phrases, and standard formulations. Okay? So in each specialized field, بأي حقل من حقول المعرفة نجد مصطلحات ونجد كذلك وحدات العبارية. وحدات العبارية تتضمن collocations يعني متلازمات لفظية وكذلك technical phrases and standard formulations. Technical phrases are defined by code source like combination of words whose structures are more or less fixed, rigid, and they are frequently used to convey certain meaning. For example, in free free on board. Free on board is an expression. This is given as a technical phrase used in the business trade field. It means يتم التسليم فوق ظهر السفينة. يعني التسليم فوق ظهر السفينة. So technical phrases are also used, and also standard formulations. Standard formulations, we find them in more formulaic texts, like conventions, bilateral agreement or multilateral agreement, or in also perfect example of formulaic text, the auditor's reports. تقرير فحص حسابات. You have fixed, you have not only fixed expressions but also long sentences which are kept the same, because to make sure that they convey the same meaning in all contexts. And Celtic code source give as an example the famous expression used in the last clause of the convention. The text is written in 4 languages, all being equally authentic. The 3 being equally authentic. لها نفس الحجية. إذن هذا بالنسبة لي so this is phraseology from the perspective, the 2 perspectives, lexicographic and terminographic perspective. Now, let's see how these, how examples and phrases of phraseology are used in general and bilingual dictionaries. So first of all, if we have a look at this entry, this is taken from Oxford English Dictionary. So prognosis. So after the definition, you have to make a prognosis. The prognosis is not good. So, I mean, we notice that the first example is a collocation as a phrase, and the second one is a sentence. The same here, volatile. So often, of a person, of their moods, you have the definition, a highly volatile personality, a phrase. Then, Edward was a highly volatile character. So here we have full sentence. This means that this is an example. Oxford English Dictionary is a dictionary which uses examples extensively. We have extensive use of examples, full sentences or examples. Why? Because this kind of dictionary targets foreign learners. And here we tackle a main issue, that is to say the use of phraseology of examples in a dictionary depends on the targeted audience, So when we target foreign learners, non-native speakers, we give more examples to illustrate the use, because the end user will use it to produce in English, not simply to understand. That's why he needs to know how the word, the entry word, the lexical unit is correctly used in different contexts. He has to know the collocational range. He should know also, he needs to know the idiomatic expressions, and so on and so forth. So, a journal. Now, this is another entry from Collins Robert Dictionary. This is a bilingual dictionary. We have also here the volatile, unstable situation, atmosphère, market, volatile, d'humeur, volatile. So it gives you the equivalent, but also, the context, the phrases. Phrases to discriminate, to show the use of the entry unit. So in bilingual dictionaries, also examples are used as discriminating device. أدوات تمييز دالة في الوجه ثنائي اللغة. You have the entry unit and you have the equivalence. But the user needs to discriminate. يحتاج أن يميز بين المعاني المختلفة والمقابلات. So the lexicographer makes use of some discrimination devices, including definitions. In addition to the entry unit, he may add a definition, he may add synonym, he may add also punctuation marks like semicolon to separate between two different meanings, and also sentences and phrases to illustrate the different types of meanings. For example, here we have humeur volatile. So volatile in French collocates with humeur. So it gives you a perfect example of a collocation in French. So examples, phrases are used in bilingual dictionaries as meaning discrimination device, to discriminate between the different types of meanings, the different types of equivalents. هذا مأخوذ من المعجم المعروف ثنائي اللغة المورد. This is Arabic English المورد dictionary. آلة خياطة سيول machine. So you see no examples. Examples aren't used here. We don't have sentences. We don't have phrases to illustrate, to discriminate between the different types of meanings. And this is a problem. If we read about the Arab lexicography, there is a lack. The Arab lexicographers don't give much importance to the phraseological units in dictionaries, either bilingual or monolingual. According to Ali Qasmi, most of the elements of the word list are just words, كلمات ومفردات وليست وحدات عبارية. إذن, so after we notice, so why? The question, why are we interested in phraseology in the context of translation? In the context of translation, we consider phraseology as a source of problems. Phraseological units are semantically unpredictable, and they are culture and language specific. Semantically unpredictable because sometimes there is no semantic harmony or coherence between the elements of the collocation or of the phrase. Like I say, to pay a visit. So semantically, there is no harmony between to pay and to visit. كيف سأترجم إلى اللغة العربية؟ هل أسدد زيارة؟ زارها أو زاره فقط. Then they are semantically unpredictable and culture and language specific, source of problem in translation. So in translation classes, translation instructors and trainers focus on this issue of phraseology. Source of problem in general translation, but also in specialized translation. And as a matter of consequence, the translation training or novice translator resorts to dictionaries. لأن المترجم عامة يرجع إلى المعاجم ضروري لأن the translator can't be knowledgeable on and about all different fields. لا يمكن أن يكون محيطا بجميع المجالات ويعرف جميع المصطلحات ويفهم جميع المفاهيم. هذا غير ممكن. وبالتالي يجب ويتعين اللجوء إلى المعاجم. Seek to seek help. So I mean that's the question why we resort to مثلا هنا أمثلة to illustrate how phraseological units are thematically unpredictable and difficult to translate. ضرب في الأرض موجودة في القرآن الكريم. ضرب في الأرض وتمت ترجمته حرفيا في بعض الترجمات إلى الإنجليزية to hit the earth مثلا frapper la terre in French وموجودة في بعض الترجمات الموجودة. What does it mean? It doesn't mean hitting the earth. It means to travel, to move from one place to another. قضى نحبه لقي حتفه. This is to die, to pass away. أجر في المجال المتخصص القانوني أجر من الباطل. لا يحق للمبتدئ أو المتأجر أن يستأجر أن يؤجر من الباطل. ما معنى الباطل؟ التأجير من الباطل. To sublease حسن جدا. To sublease. To deliver a letter, to deliver a speech, to deliver a baby. So in each context, in each collocation, the translation is different. To deliver a letter سلم خطابا, to deliver a speech to deliver a letter سلم يعني رسالة, to deliver a speech ألقى خطابا, to deliver a baby ولد امرأة. So I mean, in each case, the translation is different. So literal translation doesn't work here. It's not straightforward. إذن نظرا لهذه الصعوبات يجب اللجوء إلى الأدوات المساعدة. وهنا أرجع إلى الخريطة المجال الدراسات الترجمية وهذه الخريطة James Holmes Translation Studies Map. This map was drawn by James Holmes in 1978. Translation studies, you have pure translation studies and applied translation studies. And under applied translation studies, you have translation or translator training and translation aids. لا معنى translation aids؟ الأدوات المساعدة على الترجمة من بينها المعاجم. الآن بالإضافة إلى المعاجم هناك كذلك term banks, online translators and so on. هنا أريد أن أتوقف دقيقتين أو ثلاثة لأن القضية تمت مناقشة يعني المراجع التي يمكن أن يرجع إليها المترجم. عدة أنواع. We have the dictionaries. You have general dictionaries, monolingual, bilingual dictionaries. You have specialized dictionaries. You have, on the one hand, on the other hand, you have also what we call starting point sources and end point sources, especially when we refer to the online sources, لأن يعني المراجع يعني التي المتاحة التي يمكن لجوءها في المواقع التي موجودة في الإنترنت يجب تصنيفها إلى نوعين. Starting point, according to Daniel Gill, Daniel Gill is a famous scholar now in the field of translation studies. Starting point sources that is to say not very reliable. I'll give you examples. معجم المعاني, multilingual dictionary. Multilingual dictionaries are all the time considered as starting point sources because they don't give you the adequate perfect equivalence. A dictionary can't give you perfect equivalent adequate in all languages. That's why when you have a multilingual dictionary, you consider it as only as a starting point source. That you say, if it gives you an equivalence, you have to check in a second phase in another more reliable source. More reliable source. In an endpoint source. What I mean by endpoint source? I mean, like in parallel text, مثلا النص قانوني. مثلا, I will give you the example of عدة صدق. I have the definition of the term in the text of law. النص القانوني تعريف ما معنى الصداق, ما معنى الزواج, ما معنى كذا وكذا. So you have starting point sources, online sources like multilingual dictionaries like المعاني. You have also forums like we have forums, منتديات. يعني it gives you one. There is one very well known, and you have also different types of sources, but you have starting point and end point sources, and sometimes you have also medium sources. يعني في الوسط. لماذا؟ مثلا حينما أترجم النص القانوني من العربية إلى الإنجليزية، في بعض الأحيان يمكن اللجوء إلى النص الفرنسي, because in this French translation I will have the French equivalent, and this French equivalent can represent the starting point in my search. يعني في بعض الأحيان يمكن اللجوء إلى يعني ما يسمى المراجع البينية, medium sources. إذا هذا خلاصة القول ما يمكن قوله حول المراجع التي يمكن اللجوء إليها خلال عملية الترجمة. Now, what is the situation in specialized dictionaries? المعاجم المتخصصة ثنائية اللغة. وهنا أبدأ بالمعاجم القانونية. إنجليزية عربية. إنجليزية عربية. لأن المعاجم من العربية إلى الإنجليزية نادرة جدا. مجال القانون أتكلم. So, law dictionary English Arabic الفاروقي. This is, based on random sampling, you have lists of entries, accessory action, accessory after the fact, accessory before the fact, accessory contract, accessory during the fact, and accessory to adultery. So you have in this list, you have terms, but you have also phraseological units. Accessory before the fact, accessory after, هذه وحدات عبارية. So, and you have the equivalents, equivalent, but also explanations, definitions. Another dictionary, law dictionary, Ibrahim al-Wahhab. Accessory obligation, accessory obligations, and accessory to acquire. So you have 3 terms, that's only 1 phraseological unit. Amendments, constitutional amendments, draft amendments, minor amendments, text of the amendment, to adopt an amendment, to bring an amendment for voting, to oppose an amendment, to pass an amendment, and to submit an amendment. So we have terms, and we have also phraseological units, including collocations, like to submit an amendment. So to submit زائد is to an amendment. So, we have, sometimes we have, in addition to terms, we have also some phraseological units. إذا رجعنا إلى lexique de terminologie juridique et ondulaire, Mr. Filali, زواج الأجانب, زواج أحادي, زواج باثنين, زواج باطل, زواج تفويض, زواج داخلي. إذا هنا يعني لا وجود لوحدات العبارات. We have just terms. لأن الفرق بين المصطلح والوحدة العبارية، المصطلح يدل على مفهوم. هنا أنواع من الزواج. We have الزواج, the superordinate concept, and the subordinate concept. زواج أحادي, زواج باثنين, زواج تفويض, زواج أنواع الزواج. يعني علاقة منطقية بين المفهوم العام والمفهوم الجنس والمفاهيم الخاصة. القاموس القانوني الثلاثي قاموس قانوني موسوعي شامل موريس نخبر وحيد علباكي وصلاح مدعي. It does better because in addition to the term زواج, You have the definition زواج اتحاد رضائي احتفالي إلى آخره. You have وفي موضوع الزواج يقال هذه العبارة مستعملة زواج لم يتم زواج قبل الوفاة زواج فاصل إلى آخره. So I mean the conclusion is that I mean phraseological units الوحدات العبارية are not given fair treatment in specialized dictionaries معاجم متخصصة وبالتالي there is a need to improve this because the translator needs to know the translations of these phraseological units but what is also at issue is that and I discuss here these phraseological units also help in the understanding of the concept وهذا ما سأوضحه من خلال هذا نص يعني العملية نبدأ بالنص هذا نص عقد زواج. You have an example عقد زواج مختلط وعقد زواج هذا عقد زواج قبل المدونة. نستخرج المصطلحات من هذا النص لأن في المعجمية أو في صناعة المعجم اللكسيكوغرافي it is corpus based. الأمثلة والوحدات العبارية يجب أخذها من النصوص وليس it shouldn't be made created by the lexicographer. إذن من هذه النصوص نأخذ المصطلحات التي نحتاجها وكذلك ليس فقط المصطلحات وكذلك الوحدات العبارية phraseology. Phraseology includes religious formula, collocations and fixed expressions. إذا أخذنا عقد الزواج هناك بعض العبارات مأخوذة من الشريعة الإسلامية من القرآن ومن السنة. يبدأ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله على سيدنا محمد الحمد لله وحده والله سبحانه يؤلف بينهما لما يحب ويرضاه أمنهما الله بمنه على صداق مبارك تزوجها على بركة الله الله أعلم بثبوت هذه العبارات مأخوذة من القرآن والسنة تستعمل في عقود الزواج. ماذا يفعل المترجم؟ هناك من يترجمها حرفيا وهناك من يترجمها بمقابلات وظيفية وهناك من يتخلى عنها translation by omission. Translation by omission is one of the techniques used in translation, especially in legal translation, especially in the translation of marriage contracts. If you, from the historical perspective, if you compare translations of عقود الزواج in the 90s and nowadays, big difference because we used to translate literally. الترجمة تبدأ praise Alhamdulillah, praise be to God alone. And he entered into marriage with her with the blessing of God. يعني المترجم يحتفظ بكل العبارات المأخوذة من القرآن والسنة ويترجمها حرفيا. وإذا كان هناك نص قرآني في بعض الأحيان يترجم. أما الآن all these religious formulas and expressions are omitted. Translation by omission. So this has to do with translation policy, another issue. العدلان المنتصبان تلقي الشهادات تلقي الزواج توثيق عقد الزواج شهادة العدلين المدرجة بمذكرة الحفظ. هذه متلازمة لفظية وحدات عبارية تستعمل في عقود الزواج ولا نعطيها أهمية ولكنها أولا difficulty to translate them because if you translate them literally it doesn't work. You have to think for a solution. And also this is بالنسبة للزوجة الحل للزواج الخالية من موانعه بإذنها ورضاها وتوكيلها إياه على ذلك بتفويض منها له على ذلك. عقدت زواجها بنفسها أنكحها إياه أخوها. So how to translate these expressions and what do they mean? The need for the translation or translation equivalent is clear, established, well discussed. But as I said, these phraseological units also help in the understanding of the concept. وهنا سأقوم بتحليل يعني أرجع إلى مجال علم المصطلح وأتكلم كذلك عن المفاهيم وركز على المفهوم لأنه نسي terms we have the concepts and we have the object. إذا في النصوص الوحدات العبارية هناك بطبيعة الحال بالنص متخصص knowledge based المصطلحات the terms designate concepts in a specific field. But you have also phraseological units which also play a role in that in this designation. How? المفهوم في علم المصطلح تعرف ما هو المفهوم. What is a concept? It is a set of distinctive features. A set of distinctive features. مجموعة من الخاصيات الجوهرية. حينما أقول computer is the denomination التسمية, and you have the object الموضوع أو الشيء الموضوع illustrated by the photo, but you have the concept الصورة الذهنية وهي مجموعة من الخاصيات الجوهرية. Electronic machine it can store and deal with large amount of information. إذا هذا هو. إذا هناك المصطلح التسمية وهناك المفهوم. إذا رجعنا إلى عقد الزواج ونركز فقط على ثلاث مصطلحات الزواج الصداق والعدل. مفهوم الزواج حسب مدونة الأسرة الزواج هو ميثاق تراضي وترابط شرعي بين رجل وامرأة تكتمل فيهما الأهلية يعني السن وكذلك of sound mind and memory المتمتعين بقواهما العقلية ينعقد بإيجاب من أحد المتعاقدين وقبول من الآخر لا يصح إذا كانت هناك موانع الزواج. هذا هو مفهوم الزواج. يعني when you have the term الزواج باللغة العربية المستعمل في نص عقد الزواج يدل على هذا المفهوم الذي يتكون من هذه الخاصية الجوهرية. الصداق، ما هو الصداق؟ ما يقدمه الزوج لزوجته، الهدف منه إشعار بالرغبة في عقد الزواج، يحدد وقت إبرام العقد، ملك للمرأة تتصرف فيه كيف شاءت، يجوز الاتفاق على تعجيله أو تأجيله. العدل، مساعد القضاء، مكلف من طرف القاضي المكلف بالتوثيق، يتلقى الشهادة بدون يدون الشهادة في مذكرة الحفظ. إذا المصطلح ها هو المصطلح وها هو المفهوم، مجموعة من الخاصية الجوهرية. إذا رجعنا إلى النص يرد فيه المصطلح ويرد فيه كذلك الوحدات العبارية. إذا رجعنا مثلا إلى مصطلح الزواج ميثاق تراضي وترابط شرعي ترد عبارة ارتضياه وألزماه نفسه تكتمل فيهما الأهلية، ترد عبارة يتمتعان بالأهلية والتمييز والاختيار، ترد كذلك عبارة بعد صدور الإيجاب والقبول. بالنسبة للمترجم ما معنى الإيجاب والقبول؟ هو ركن من أركان الزواج، ينعقد لأن الزواج ينعقد بإيجاب من أحد المتعاقدين وقبول الآخر. The offer and acceptance, the two pillars of the contract, including marriage contract. الحل الزواج الخالية من موانعه، موانع الزواج the impediments، موانع الزواج المؤقتة والدائمة. إذا الحل الزواج، إذا هذه العبارات المسكوكة التي تستعمل في النص عقد الزواج هي تدل على بعض الخاصيات الجوهرية التي يتكون منها المفهوم، وبالتالي تكون نسقا في النص وتساعد على فهم المفهوم. على المترجم أن يكون على دراية بذلك حتى يترجم النص كما يجب، لأنه إذا فهم النص والترابط بين هذه العبارات وبين المصطلحات ستكون الترجمة موفقة. إذا أخذنا مثال الصداق ترد في النص على صداق مبارك قدره ونهايته، يعني يحدد وقت إبرام العقد. قبضت الزوجة جميع الصداق قبضا تاما اعترافا، لأن المترجم حينما يقرأ النص ما معنى اعتراف؟ قبضته الزوجة قبضا تاما اعترافا. لماذا قبضا تاما اعترافا؟ بالنسبة للبعض هذا ركاكة وإطناب وحشو وإطناب. No, because this is related to الصداق يمكن أن يقدم يعني في زواج يعني المبلغ بأكمله أو نصف جزء من أو إلى آخره. يعني هذه العبارات المسبوقة لها أو العبارات الوحدات لها دور في فهم المفاهيم وتحديد المفاهيم. العدل. تلقى العدلان المنتصبان للإشهاد. العدلان ما معنى منتصبان للإشهاد؟ For the novice translator, what does this mean? Novice. العدل، وهذا يرجع إلى المفهوم، إلى المصطلح. ما معنى؟ هو مساعد القضاء مكلف من طرف القاضي، يعني يتم تعيينه من طرف القاضي. العدلان المنتصبان تم تنصيبهم للإشهاد، to receive testimonies and record testimonies، لتلقي الشهادات بشهادة العدلين. المدرجة بمذكرة الحفظ. مدرجة لماذا؟ لأن the function وظيفة العدل توثيق وتدوين. المدرجة بمذكرة الحفظ in the record notebook. إذا ترون بأن هذه الوحدات العبارية المستعملة في النصوص المتخصصة، وخاصة هذا المثال عقد الزواج، هي وحدات عبارية يصعب ترجمتها من ناحية. إذا المعجم يجب ويتعين أن يوفر المقابلات لهذه الوحدات العبارية، هذا من جهة. وهذه الوحدات العبارية these phraseological units also help in the understanding, in slicing up the concept and understanding the concept. إذا الهدف يعني the project is to have such entries that you say just 2-3 minutes. This is an entry, an example of the entry، يعني مدخل من المعجم متخصص عربي، يعني عربية إنجليزية، in which you have not only the terms but also the phraseological units. You have زوجة مثلا to marry، and to marry she married herself. كيف سأترجم يعني تزوجت أو زوجت نفسها بنفسها؟ العربية الإنجليزية تقول she entered into marriage or she contracted marriage herself. أنكحها إياه أخوها. She was given, in English we say to be given in marriage by. يعني الوحدات العبارية باللغة العربية لها مقابلات وظيفية في اللغة. الهدف يجب أن يعرفها المستعمل المعجم. fit from يعني الحل الزواج الخالية من موانعه. Fit for marriage and free from any impediments. Fit for. I mean this phrase is common in English. Fit for something, for a purpose. Free from impediments, also a fixed expression frequently used in English. يعني أترجم بمقابلات وظيفية في اللغة الكتب. وشكرا.
Thank you, Professor Mitni, for your insightful paper. Quickly, we move to the last speaker of our panel, Professor Radwani, who will talk to us about collocation and the limitation of bilingual dictionaries. So I think everybody knows Professor Radwani, so thank you, Steve.
So my presentation will be a bit will reduce the scope because of the other presentations. My presentation will deal primarily with collocations, متلازمات. I would like to start with a rather verse of Alexander Pope, which became kind of proverb. Lesser knowledge is a dangerous thing. Based on this proverb, I'd like to say that translation indeed is an uphill task. And anyone who wants to test his knowledge, he can try translation. This presentation is based on my experience as a teacher of translation in this faculty, beginning with the old-fashioned system, third year and fourth year, and with the updated students, semester 3 and semester 4. I noticed that many students, if not the majority of them, have problems with collocations. I give you some examples that had happened once in the past. I gave the ones in the exam a text titled البحر الأبيض المتوسط. Strangely, and oddly speaking, I get different funny translations.
Why?
Yeah, middle white sea, and others average white sea. The same thing happens with the same text. We have Don Quixote. في العربية يزيدون لها واحد الهاء ما عرفتش علاش كيزيدوها دون كوشيتيه شيء غريب يعني في الترجمة. أغلبية the majority of students translate Don Duna or Quixote without Kushitiye. Yeah, something strange as a collocation. It makes you laugh, but it is, this is what we call the little knowledge is a dangerous thing. I start with these brief definitions, as you know on the screen. Collocation is the habitual act of juxtaposing words together in a particular way to make sense in any language, either in speech or writing. So collocation should be respected in those dimensions. One word first, the organization that words stay with. So that's an obligation that we have a string of words that make sense. We should be aware of the fitting, as the professor has already thought about, the fitting context where a word can occur. All right. To know and understand which words must go together, one should master the languages in question, especially in dealing with bilingual operation in translation. This is one of the required tools in order to have an accurate translation. If you don't master the languages, just keep things as they are and don't try anything. Since collocations are an ineluctable process in translation, learners should be aware of word arrangements that make sense. Put differently, learners cannot grasp the meaning of collocation in the source language as he does not master its equivalence in the target language. So the problem of mastering the two languages, SL and TL, is a must, is a necessity to have an accurate translation. Here are some examples of types of, let's say, collocations. You can have adverbs and adjectives, adjectives and noun, noun and noun, noun and verb, etc. These are simply the types of translation that a translator or a learner may come across. The difficulties, there are some, let's say, things that hinder us from having an accurate translation. The difficulties of collocation are pertained to the seemingly unexpected combination of lexical items in SL and the way the learners can find an accurate equivalent in SL. Sometimes, as we have the examples of الزواج اللي مستعد الزواج راه كاين الحل. We have some unexpected, let's say, expressions or combination or juxtaposition of lexical items that it is sometimes very hard to find an equivalence in the target language. The other difficulty is the use of bilingual dictionaries, where the learners frequently maintain the literal meaning of the lexical items as they are given as equivalences. This is one of the problems that translators or learners find, is that they do not think about the collocation in the target language, but they simply keep their literal meaning found in the dictionaries as a solution to translate someone. And this usually, as we will see later on, creates many problems for the learners. Collocations, be they statements, idioms, or proverbs, cause intricate problems and difficulties even for professional translators. And this is one of to sympathize with our students. We find some excuse for the students because even professional translators sometimes find very difficult instance to translate some occurrences. There are some, let's say, examples. Pay attention. There are taken from pay the list from the dictionaries. We have دفع, سددنا, هوس, and احسبه, وفار, الدا, والدعاء. Right? So if we keep the two words in Arabic, it will not make sense. So this is the movement from the source L, from the source language, to the target language. We should know that in Arabic we have to use only one word, intibah. That's in the Arabic, let's say, language, the verb is deleted, as it is the case in many instances. To give someone warm reception. Have to give someone different, let's say, suggestions. These are taken from the list of the dictionaries. The problem of the dictionaries is that sometimes we find more than 20 equivalent words, concepts, or literally items. Which means that the students are usually lost which word can be taken in order to make sense in the target language. Or, دافئ, متحمس, and so on. The problem is that har doesn't exist in the bilingual or the dictionary. But the true translation is that خصص فلان باستقبال har. So the word har isn't included in the worm, in the dictionary. So, and yet the true or the accurate translation is استقبال حار وليس استقبال دافئ أو متحمس أو ودي أو حماسي أو غير ذلك. So this is the problem of dictionaries, how we can find the true word in order to translate. Keep the change. Keep, you have endless list of the keep, and the change we have تغيير, تبديل, صرافة, whereas the meaning is احتفظ بالباقي. الباقي غير موجودة في اللائحة كما يلاحظ. Alright. Good day. The same thing. We have good, we have جيد, خير, كريم, طيب, ولكن بالعربية نقول يوم سعيد وليس يوم جيد أو يوم لذيذ. Alright. Heavy meal. Heavy meal. Heavy, you have the same thing. هنا في الغربية نقول وجبة دسمة. فما زال الحالة اللي فيكم الجوع دابا. Alright. The same thing for تناول الغداء الصغير. Here we have, alright, if we keep the same order, the same amount of lexical items, it will give us a false, let's say, pronunciation, as it is in French. Prendre le déjeuner, on prend le petit déjeuner. Yeah? If we keep the same order, the same amount of words, it doesn't make makes sense, of course. And here's some, let's say, this is based on some recent experience with my students in the third semester. I gave them, I gave a very short span of time, 5 minutes, in order to translate these expressions. To seize the opportunity, it is a good day, the hour of decision, to catch the bus. Yeah. 99.99% they give us أمسك الفرصة ويوم جيد وساعة القرار وأمسك الحافلة. Yeah. They use their, let's say, electronic dictionary, their mobile, but they jot down the first word they find in the list. This is why they have such a list, say, all the translation instead of انتهت الفرصة يوم سعيد ساعة الحسم والحق الحافلة. We have problems with, let's say, preposition. Absit, at, and fugitive at, yeah, at, when mean. All right. This is, they usually keep the same preposition in Arabic, and usually prepositions in Arabic are misleading. This is a warning for everybody. Dictionaries are helpful, but they are deceitful. You should not trust your dictionaries. They may be helpful sometimes, but on many occasions they are very deceitful. They can give you some inaccurate translation. As it happens once, historically speaking, some mistakes or mistranslation may last for centuries. This happens for the Arabs who didn't translate from the Greeks' inheritance. For example, when they want to translate drama, they translate as الهجاء. فقالوا لدينا من الهجاء ما يكفي، لماذا سنحتاج إلى هجاء الإغريق؟ فاستمرت هذه lasted for centuries till the French colonized Egypt in the 18th century, when the French introduced, let's say, the drama and the plays, that the Arabs, they say that, well, we have made a mistake of, let's say, about 12 centuries. Means that it lasts for a long time because of this mistranslation. And translation sometimes depends on the, let's say, cultural background of the translated things. For example, we have the French proverb, cela me chauffe le cœur. It depends on the climate. The French live in very cold weather, so they are in need of warmth. الإنسان العربي كما تعرفون مدهون بالحرارة، يقول هذا يثلج الصبر. Both proverbs express kind of happiness and relaxation, but each one depends on the climate where they live. One of them use warmth, and the other use coolness, and so on. Maybe this is the conclusion. I'd like to simply to conclude that problem of collocation constitutes a very, let's say, hindrance to the translators, including, for example, the cultural context, the culturally related specifics such as idioms, proverbs, and others. These are the main features that translator should take into consideration. I give you no chance to find me. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ndoni, for being short and to the point. Really short and sharp.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so it's your turn, distinguished audience. We have 7 minutes for the discussion. So if you are interested to ask a question to one of our panelists, please stand up, say who you are and to whom you are. So, Professor Khloufi, if you allow me, it's a comment or a question?
Just a remark.
Okay.
Very small.
So we start with Professor Khloufi, and then I give the chance to our distinguished audience. Right.
I'd like to thank all the speakers. The menu has been very rich. And my remark is directed to Professor Julie. You talked about phraseology in the domain of law. I guess that this is one of the tiny problems in the domain of translation, since, as you know, ترجمة العقود والمستندات is based on pre-prepared canvas. So once you're a practitioner, a translator, you have the canvas there, and the only thing that changes is the names, the dates, and so on. So those phrases, I guess that they are sorted once and for all when it comes to legal documents. That's the remark. Probably phraseology would be better studied in relation to the domain of literary translation, and that would be more enriching. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Khloufi. I will give the floor to Professor Clay for one short comment, and then I give the floor to the student.
Thank you very much, presenter. My question is actually addressed to Professor Douani. I thank you very much for your presentation. It was short and sharp and short and sweet. That was great. I liked it. Well, concerning, the teaching of translation, I have never had this experience. Because I have never taught the subject itself. But since you have evoked, the use of students' dictionary, the misuse of students, that is, students, they misuse dictionaries and they opt for the first meaning of the word, they are looking for. I suggest, okay, if I were teaching, that topic, the first, I would give a big share of the course, to the use of the dictionary. How students would use dictionary and should use dictionary. Not just, how to translate, but the use, the manipulation of the dictionary is a very important thing that students should normally, it's a skill. That they should represent, the meaning they need to vehicle, and then, to go straight forward to the word that meets that meaning, okay? This is a comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sitlay. The first one to ask. Okay, I want to ask a question. Shuaib, is it possible that we start with Professor?
Thank you very much. Just a remark to build about what the Professor Khloufi said, relating to the translation of marriage certificates. I think that a document, a legal document like this, needs only a documentary or secondary translation. Because the document is legal in a system which is different from the European courts, then it would not be admitted at all. Normally, if you draft any legal document, it could be a judgment, it could be whatever, a divorce, whatever, then it is not admitted unless it is processed through a legal system which is similar to the target system. So this is what we mean by a secondary or documentary translation.
Admitted
so
by
if
the
it
target
is,
administration.
yeah, of course. I am a judge in an English court. Why should I care about I had the chance to translate, of course, marriage certificates. And one of them I had before the name of the bride. Before السيد فلان, okay, I had الوسيم, الشهم, الجميل, and 14 adjectives like this written in the document. So, I mean, as a judge in an English court, I would like to know that this guy is married legally. Then all what I need is his name, not even his mother's name and father's name, the name of the bride, the bridegroom, the husband, the wife, and maybe the dowry, the date, and the court issuing the marriage certificate, and that's it. That's what I need. Okay? Exactly. No, as a judge, that's what I need, because this document simply tells me that this guy is married, that's all. So I will not, as a translator, why should I go in? All what you said is very important, how to deal with these fixed expressions and, you know, the way to paraphrase them and the role of dictionaries. It's very important, and the approach is excellent. But as a translator, if I know that this needs only documentary or secondary translation, then I would simply eliminate all these expressions, okay,
Thank you.
that cause a problem.
Thank you, Professor. So, Shuaib?
Good afternoon, everyone. I have two questions and one remark. Starting with the remark, reacting to Dr. Wani's claim of the need to be bilingual if you want to come up with an appropriate translation. In case of collocations, I think mastering the two languages, the target language and the source language, is not enough. I think it also needs to be bicultural. So bilingualism and biculturalism are a must for translators. The first question is addressed to Dr. Medjuni. In the case of general translation, I think we need linguistic knowledge. And in case of specialized translation, we need content knowledge. But in addition to these, I think we also need legal knowledge. I don't know if you are offering this course in your institute, because sometimes translators can be prosecuted in case they come up with a translation which is not appropriate. So I don't know how we can integrate this linguistic knowledge, content knowledge, and legal knowledge. And the third question is addressed to Professor Kinish. You mentioned that the cultural, economic, and social development of a community reflects positively on its language. And I think this is the case of English, because every year tens of words are added to the Oxford Dictionary. So I'm asking, how can translators deal with the words for which they cannot find the equivalence in the target language?
Thank you, Shuaib.
To 40 French universities, and which were looking into the history of, not the history, the treatment that those works which have a scientific importance, a science, a pure science relation in the Arab tradition. And they were also doing Hindi one and stuff like this, but Arab was working on the Arab one, and he was working mostly on the works of Zahid. And he was working more specifically on the numerous words that Zahid has been using, or is using, in his book Al-Hayawan, Kitab Al-Hayawan, and many other treatises of his, wherein there were plenty of words. And he noted one of the things that translators did did about the many concepts, zoological concepts that Zahid used in Arabic. They dropped them down because there was no equivalent in the European, in the French, basically, that they were looking at, in the French language. Zahid was using zoological words, still have them in books, but they are not in dictionaries. According to Arab, his work has been published, paper has been published in 2010, and it can be found.
Thank you, Professor Kinish. Stephen Henry.
شكرا أستاذي.
Concerning the first question about phraseology, the use of phraseology in legal documents and the computerized canvas that you say, indeed, marriage contracts. If you go to translation offices here in Morocco, you have computerized models already existing. The secretary has just to change the names of the parties involved in the contract. Indeed, but in translation teaching and learning, we focus on the process. We don't focus on the end product, we focus on the process. That you say we focus on problems and strategies. That you say it is pertinent and relevant to deal with these problems in translation, because to sensitize the students, trainees to the problems and guide them towards the adequate solutions. And as far as phraseology, it does exist in legal text, in legal documents, not only in literature. Maybe idioms do not exist in legal text, but phraseological units, legal text team with phraseological units. And that's it,
Thank you very much.
I give you an example. In lease contracts عقد كراء وردت عبارة ويمنع المكتري منعا كليا من بيع السارود لا يحق له بيع السارود. كيف سنترجم باع السارود أو المفتاح؟ مفتاح سنترجمه حرفيا. هذه يعني وحدة عبارية. يعني هنا we show the students, the trainee, how to go through the process of terminological search, البحث المصطلحي, to resort to adequate sources. لأن حتى المعجم not very helpful. He will not find the equivalent. To sell the key doesn't make sense in an English text. So هذا هو. إذن phraseology, to deal with phraseology from translation perspective is very pertinent and relevant. Though we have indeed some translation models, pre-existing translation models. As far as documentary translation, as far as I know, Julian House identified when talking about the function of translation, the scope of translation, she identifies two types of translation, documentary translation and the other one. Documentary translation for her is the one which is source-oriented, literal. Under documentary we have interlinear translation, for example, which we use in teaching languages. Latin, you have Latin sentence, and under Latin you have the equivalent in English or in French. So documentary translation means a literary Slavish translation of the source text. But if I follow you, I guess the point what you mean, we need to opt for a more free translation, target-oriented translation, and indeed this is what happens. One of my students was, in translation interpreting, he was a translator, or sworn translator, and he told me that he regularly they have meetings with consulates, embassies. They show them how to translate. For them, as far as the religious formula, we get rid of them. Just give me the name of the spouse, the male spouse, the name of the female spouse, when entered into marriage, legally competent, and so you keep just the legal content, valid content. As for the other expressions, you get rid of them. So yes, indeed, legal translation now is target-oriented, utilitarian. I don't remember the exact term used by Julian House, but it is target-oriented translation indeed. Now, as for the difference between general translation and specialized translation, bear in mind that translation competence, الكفاءة الترجمية تتضمن الكفاءة اللغوية أولا. Irrespective of the typology of the text. You can't translate if you don't master the two languages, the source language and the target language. إذا الكفاءة اللغوية هي ضرورية بغض النظر عن الاعتبار عن نوعية النص. كفاءة اللغوية وكفاءة كذلك تواصلية. هنا أحيل إلى الكاتب not Peter Newmark but another one. إذا الكفاءة اللغوية والكفاءة التواصلية، ما معنى الكفاءة التواصلية؟ يعني استعمال لغة، يعني بارول، يعني في المكان، اللغة المناسبة في المقام المناسب. يعني if I need to be idiomatic, I have to be idiomatic. إذا هذا يعني الكفاءات, the components of the translation competence, yes, indeed, you have the linguistic competence, the pragmatic competence, but in specialized translation, indeed, you need also knowledge. You have to be knowledgeable about the field. Legal translation, يعني على الأقل الأرضية، يعني مثلا أترجم نص قانوني يجب. إذا فلهذا في برامج الترجمة in translation teaching programs you have what we call background courses. مثلا بالنسبة لطالب الترجمة يدرس القانون، العلاقات الدولية والاقتصاد، وكلها مواد تساعد تغني وتثري يعني المعلومات الطالب. الأستاذ العميد في كتابه وضعية الترجمة يخصص الفصل السابع لثقافة المترجم، وهنا الثقافة لا يعني الثقافة يعني تثقيف المترجم، يعني المترجم يجب أن يكون ملما لشتى المواضيع. المترجم المهني he subscribes to different periodicals. He should be he should update his knowledge frequently and continuously.
Sindioni, thank you so much. Really appreciate all your collaborations.
All right, I'll be brief in answering my colleague Talhi. The problem of giving advice to the students is a regular process along the semester. From the beginning of the first course to the last one with the farewell course, I keep harping on using the right word in the right context. Mentioning them that it is not, translation doesn't mean picking up the first word in the dictionary, but by reading the whole list and then choose the right word in the right context. The other problem which I keep on insisting on is that before they start translating, they should read the text or the passage at least 3 times. But what is noted and noticed is that once the students are given the exam sheets, they open dictionaries and they start dealing with the first word in the passage. All the advice are out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. This is one of the problems here. And thank you very much.
Thank you. So on behalf of the audience, I would like to thank our panelists for interesting and accessible papers. And on behalf of our panelists, I would like to thank you for your questions and this quality.